In this tutorial, we are going to build a VRChat world from start to finish. This tutorial is for complete beginners, so we're going to go through the entire process of building a VRChat world from scratch. We're going to build it in Blender, bring it over into Unity, set it up for VRChat, and upload it to the game. The purpose of this tutorial is to teach you the entire process of building a VRChat world. So if you've never done it before and you're a complete beginner, this is the video for you. I will assume that you have the proper software installed, so I'm going to assume that you installed Blender, the proper version of Unity, and that you have the VRChat Creator Companion. If you do not have that, I will link below a video that can help you download all that stuff if you need a video tutorial to help you. I will also link the VRChat documentation to help you get started, but other than that, I'm going to assume you've got the Creator Companion, the proper version of Unity, and Blender. Assuming that you've got all that, let's open up Blender and get started. If you've never messed with Blender, let me teach you a little bit about the controls. So down here in the bottom left, you should see whatever buttons I press on my keyboard, you should be able to see down here. So if you're having trouble following along, just look down here and do your best to figure out what buttons I'm pressing. As we go along and I build out a scene or build out my meshes for VRChat or for the world, I'll do my best to explain what I'm pressing and why I'm doing what I'm doing. But let's just talk about the movements in Blender to begin with. If you hit the middle mouse button, you can rotate around a pivot point. I think by default the pivot point is at 0, 0, but as you work in Blender, you're going to be moving around the scene quite a bit, and it can be kind of annoying to figure out how to get your pivot point back to a certain spot. So just to teach you how to move your pivot point around, you can select an object by pressing the left in object mode. You can press the left mouse click, select an object, and then you can press the period key on the number pad. And that will reorient your camera view to whatever object you have selected. So this camera now is the pivot point for my screen. So hitting that middle mouse button will rotate around this. If I scroll in and out, I can zoom in and out of also focusing in on that pivot point. If I you do the left mouse click, select the cube and press the period delete key, it will reorient my camera to focus on that. And now this cube is my pivot point. Just by selecting objects, it will not change your pivot point. You will have to do that. Now, if I hold shift and middle mouse button and pull over, this is actually changed. Like I'm moving around the scene, but it is also changing my pivot point. So now my pivot point is somewhere in the middle of this space over here. So there is really no spot that it's focusing in on. I just use shift, middle mouse, and I'm dragging around the scene. My pivot point is changing, so I'm now rotating around this empty space. If I want to reorient myself, I can right click in object mode, select an object, press that period delete key on my number pad and reorient my camera. And now the pivot point is my cube once again. Just scrolling in, hitting the middle mouse button and the shift middle mouse button, that will help you move around Blender quite a bit. Before we move forward, I'm going to press Control S to save. And then I have a folder set up here already. And I'm going to just save my project here. You can save your project wherever you want. And I'm going to call this Tutorial Entertainment Room. Save Blender file. Something else to know about Blender is you have a bunch of different modes you can select. By default, you are in object mode, and that will allow you to select certain objects. To edit an object like this cube, you can go up here, go into edit mode. By pressing tab on the keyboard will also let you toggle between those two modes. Going into edit mode, I can press 1 for vertices select, so that will allow me to select the little dots here on this cube in edit mode. Pressing 2 or selecting this. By pressing 2 or selecting the edge select option up here in the top left will allow me to select edges on my object. And by pressing 3 or by just clicking on this face select, I can select faces on this object. Hitting the middle mouse button, I can rotate around this object. And just like in object mode, when we had an object selected, if we press that period delete key to reorient our screen, we can go press 1 here, go to vertices select, we can select something on this object in edit mode, press that period delete key, and it will reorient our camera onto whatever we had selected. So in this case, it's the vertices, so it's reoriented our camera on the vertice. So I find that really helpful when I'm moving around, and when I was a beginner in Blender, it was kind of difficult to figure that out. So let's press tab, let's go back into object mode. I'm going to press A, which is going to select everything in here, and I'm going to press X, and I'm going to delete it. And now that there's nothing in my scene, I want to add something in my scene. And let me just give you my vision of what I want to build here. And the idea I come up with is like this entertainment, kind of like a basement sort of room, just a single room. There's going to be like a couch in there, TV. We'll fill it up with some props that I have. So to start building that, I need to add some objects to this scene. So I'm going to do Shift A, and that's going to bring up this menu, and this is going to let me add certain things to this project. So I'm going to go to Mesh, and I'm just going to start with the floor. That's what I usually end up starting with when I'm starting a new build. So I'm just going to select this plane, and it brought this plane in. And if I go into edit mode, I can press A. I'm in vertice select, so I can select everything, and I can press S to scale. I can also press 2 to go to edge select. I can select this edge and press E to extrude. And then you see, if you look, and you can see this green line, that is our y-axis. I can press Y and lock this edge to the y-axis. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to left click on my mouse to place it where I want it. I can also do things like press 3, go to face select. I can select this face. I can press E, and I can extrude this up. So now we kind of have a cube here. So this is a pretty weird shape, but I just want to kind of introduce you to the different things you can do with the tools in Blender. So we've extruded some stuff, we've selected some different things. If we press A, select everything, press S, we can scale this up, and you can see that this looks nothing like an entertainment room. So let's press Control Z, let's undo everything, and let's just go back to this plane. One thing that's really important when you're building in Blender is you want to make sure that you get the scale right. So I've got this cube here, or I've got this plane here, and it's kind of like this plane just sitting here by itself. It's kind of hard to tell exactly how big this is compared to like a person. So we need to bring in an object here that's going to help orient our sense of scale. So to do that, I'm going to go back into object mode, select object. I'm going to press Shift A to come back to this menu. I'm going to go to Mesh, and I'm going to add a cube. And then while this cube is selected, I can come over here to the top right, and I can choose something like item. And then I can go down to dimensions, and I can press, I'm going to change this to 0.2, and the Z dimension, I'm going to do 1.8 meters. So that's about, I think a little taller than 6 foot. So now I have this cube that is about 6 foot tall. So this is kind of the height of, I guess, an average human. I don't know if humans are that tall on average, but we have a cube, and this can represent our person in the scene. So I want to move this on top of the floor, so I can, while in object mode, I can select this object. I can press G, and then I can G will let me move it around, and if I press Z, it'll lock to the Z axis, and then I can just drag it up and try to make it level with the floor. So that's our person. That's kind of, if a person was standing in here, they would be about that tall. So that kind of gives you a better idea how big this plane is. So with that, I'm going to select the plane by hitting the left mouse button, select this object, press tab, go into edit mode. I'm going to press S, I'm going to scale. I'm just going to bring it up, and we're going to do something like that. Go back into object mode. I'm going to show you another tool that you can use to help orient your sense of scale. So in Blender has built-in tools that allow you to walk around in your project. And I really like using it to walk around what I built to kind of get a sense for how big it actually is. Because even with this cube here, it's hard to really get a sense of what it's going to be like walking around here when you're in the scene. But with this, you can actually do it. So to walk around in your scene, all you have to do is press Shift tilde, and it's going to basically put you in walk mode. And if there's nothing under you, you will just fall into nothing. So let's move the camera so that we're above the plane. I'm going to press Shift tilde, and I'm going to fall on here, and then I can use WASD to walk around this plane. And now you can see, if we go to, I just press escape to get out of that. If I go to file, I think I can go, or maybe it's edit, preferences, navigation. If I go down to gravity is checked on. View height is 1.8. So This cube is 1.8 meters tall, so if I press Shift tilde and I fall on the plane, you can see that my camera view is right at the top of this. This cube is supposed to represent the top of a person, so maybe we can change that. We can go to Edit, Preferences, go to Navigation, hit Gravity. Let's just do like 1.6 meters or something. Let's close that, and then we can do Shift tilde, and then WASD will let us walk around. And you can kind of see, I think this gives us a better idea. So this is a person or your player walking around on this plane. So this also kind of gives you an idea of how big this plane is. If I press tab, this will allow me to toggle between fly mode and walk mode. So right now I'm in fly mode and I'm using WASD to fly around. And then if I press tab again, it's going to go into walk mode. And now there's nothing under me, so I'm falling into abyss. If I press tab again, I can go back to fly mode. So now I'm flying back. I'm pressing shift to kind of speed up here. So shift is kind of like run in Blender. So I don't see a lot of people talking about these types of movement tools in Blender, but I find them really useful. So I highly recommend using it. Let's press tab, go back into the walk mode. Now we're walking around. So yeah, but you'll see me jump in and out of that mode quite often. But there's also another thing that I do to help with scale, and that is to bring in props. So I also highly recommend you do this. Now, typically when I build in Blender and I want to build a scene, I am not building I'm not trying to create every single prop for this world in this project. Typically, I just want to get like the base down, and that's what we're going to be focusing on building, is the base of the world. So that's going to be like the floors, the walls, but things like doors, windows, while it needs to be built into the base, I typically prefab that stuff out later, which we'll talk about when we get to it. But even with that, I will import props to help me scale the space around certain objects. So I've actually prepared a couple of props in there. You can download them in the description. The links are there, and I'm just going to find those. So go down there, download these files, and then you can import them into your project. So I'm going to go to import. So file, import, FBX, and I'm just going to find where I save them. So I save them in here, and we are going to import all these FBX objects. The meshes I just imported and that I included below are parts of like a couch and then a door. So I'm just going to, in object mode, I'm just going to select these, press G, and I'm going to press Shift Z, and that's going to lock it to the X and Y axis. And then I'm just going to move them over. So let's just select each one of these. Shift Z, let's move these over, G, Shift Z. And you can kind of see what I've included here. And then I'm gonna select both. This door is two parts, so it's like the door part and then the outer part. So selecting both of these, so I can select one and then hold Shift, select another one, press G to move them both, Shift C to lock it to the X and Y axis, and then I'm just gonna move this over. So I've included these couch pieces and then this door, because I want to include them into the room. And so to build the walls around the space and build a space around like a seating area, I thought these would be the best props to bring in to help scale the space a bit. When you brought these in, they should have been at 0, 0 in our plane when we brought it in. And when we created this plane, we created it at 0, 0. The reason this plane is at 0, 0 and this cube is at 0, 0, that is because our cursor is at 0, 0. So our cursor is this little target object looking thing. If I press Shift in object mode and then right click, I can move the cursor around. So now if I press Shift A and I bring in, let's say, another plane, it now comes in over here. But I'm going to delete that. So that is why everything came in at 0, 0. The reason this stuff came in at 0, 0 is because it was exported at 0, 0. Let's start building this out. I want a door. So in my head, I want the player to spawn in at the door and then like walk down a little hallway and then enter the space from there. So I'm going to select the door, Shift, hold both these parts, press G to move, lock it to the X and Y, and I'm going to just bring it over here. And then I'm going to select this object and I want to duplicate this plane. So I'm going to press Shift D, and then I'm going to lock it to the X axis, and I'm bringing it over here. I'm going to go into edit mode, press A to select everything. And right now I'm in edge select, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to press S to scale, and I'm going to bring this down. And then I'm going to press G to move, and X, and I'm going to move it over here by the door. And something that's important to note, when we move something in edit mode, we are moving like the vertices of the object. You can see this little yellow dot here, or it's like an orange dot. That is the origin point of this object. And so when we move things around or duplicate, or we mess with the vertices in edit mode, when we go back to object mode, everything that was a part of that is now part of that object. So if we press R to rotate, we're rotating on the origin point of the object, and it's changing all these shapes. And these, this is pretty crazy. You wouldn't really have shapes like this. And we don't need it all, so we're going to delete it. But that's just to show you kind of how meshes work in Blender. We're going to select this object, press Tab to go into edit mode. I'm going to press 1 to go into vertice mode. I'm going to select all these vertices and delete what we don't want, since I just duplicated a whole bunch of stuff. To duplicate, it was Shift D. To select everything, we're going to press L on the keyboard. So since we're in vertice select, we're going to go to a vertice, and we're going to press L on the keyboard, and we're going to go to this one, press L, and then we're going to go to this vertice, press L, and that's going to select everything that these vertices are connected to. The same thing happens in face select. So if I have an object with more than one face, I can hover over this face. So I'd press 3, I'm in face select, I can hover over this face, press L, it selects all those faces, and then I can do the same thing all the way over here. Same thing if I'm in edge select, selecting an edge, it does the exact same thing. So that's just kind of gives you an idea of kind of how some of these tools work. Let's press X. We're going to delete all these vertices, and we are left with just this. So in object mode, let's move this stuff over. Selecting this plane, we're going to go into edit mode. Pressing L, I can select everything. I'm going to press S, and I'm going to scale it in the Y direction. I'm going to make this a bit thicker. And then maybe grab this edge, press G and X. I'm going to bring it down this way. I actually think it would be a bit more interesting if the player spawns here and then there's some steps going into this room. So that's what I'm going to do. In object mode, I'm going to select all these objects, and then I'm going to press G, locking the Z axis, bring it up. Maybe let's bring it this way a little bit. I need to make stairs now. So I'm going to grab the cube that is our player, and I'm going to press the delete key on the number pad to reorient my camera, and we're going to kind of just use this shape to help us scale our stairs. So Shift right click to bring our cursor over here. I'm going to press Shift A, and let's bring in a new object. Let's do a new plane. Let's go into edit mode. Select everything, press S to scale, G to lock to the, and G to move, Z to lock to the Z axis. Let's grab, pressing 2, I'm going to go to edge select. I can select this edge, press G, lock it to the Y axis, G to move, lock to the Y axis. Let's bring it this way, G, and I think I'm just going to try to scale this. This is like the step to our stairs, and I'm going to make it a bit longer. If I go back into object mode and then I move this, pressing G to move, I kind of want it to be the length of this. This might be a bit too long, so let's select that, go into edit mode, press A to select all of it, S to scale, lock it to the Y axis. Let's bring it down that way, press tab, go back into object mode, select this object, press tab, press A to select all, and we're going to press S to scale, Y to lock it in the Y axis. So I just pressed 7 on the number pad, and that's going to give me a top-down orthographic view of our objects. That way I can get a better view and try to scale this, and I can scale this to the same length as that, and I think this needs to be a bit longer, so we're going to press G, X to lock to the X axis. Let's go back into object mode. Pressing G in object mode, Shift Y and X, or Shift Z to lock to the Y and X axis. And I'm going to bring it back over here and kind of compare it to, our player here. Shift tilde, Shift tilde, and I'm going to kind of just walk around. Does this look like a believable step? It's a bit big, but I'm okay with things being a little bit big in VRChat. Especially in VR, things can feel very small, so I do typically model things a bit bigger when I'm doing stuff for VRChat. So I think this size it's probably good. So let's go into edit mode. I'm going to select this edge, and I'm going to do E to extrude, Z to lock into the Z axis, and I'm going to do something like that. And then I'm going to press E to extrude again, X to lock into the X axis, and I'm going to do something like that. So this is going to be kind of like a wood step. Maybe it doesn't need to be that far, so I'm going to press G, X, bring it in, and I'm going to press E again, bring it down. Let's go into object mode, G, Z, let's take it all the way down to the floor, and I'm going to do like 2 steps. So I'm going to use the modifier. So modifiers are like tools that can help change your mesh in a lot of different ways. So we are going to use something that's called the array modifier. So if we go to this little modifier property, it's the little wrench icon, go up to add modifier, and we're going to add array, and this is going to duplicate your mesh a certain amount of distance away from your object. We are going to, we just want 2, and I'm going to do -1, and that's going to put it in the direction that I want it, and then maybe we'll do 1. And now we've got something like this. If I press 3, I can go to face select, and I want to select these 3 faces, but you know, there's a lot going on here now, kind of. To make that a bit easier, I can press Shift Z. While I'm in edit mode, pressing Shift Z will take me to the wireframe mode. So if you go up here in the top right, you can see that I've changed this setting here, this viewport shading setting. If I press Shift Z again, it takes me back to what it was originally, which was this. Press Shift Z, going back to the wireframe mode. So I can then use my selection to select this. If you don't have the box selection, by pressing W or by doing this, you can change what kind of selection you have. You can do like lasso. Lasso is a good one. But by pressing W, you can kind of change how you select stuff. The cube select is fine, or the square select, or whatever it's called. I'm just going to select those, press Shift C to go back to the solid viewport shading, and I'm going to press G to move, Z to lock into the Z axis, bring it up. Let's walk around here by pressing Shift tilde. This seems like some real steps, kind of. Seems a bit big, actually. Maybe if I grab this edge, press G, lock the x-axis, bring that in, and then I can Shift Z, select these faces, G, Z, and that's pretty good. And now you'll notice with the array modifier, these aren't touching, and we would really like for them to touch. So I'm going to press 3 on the number pad, and that's going to give me another orthographic view, but this is not the right direction, so let's do 1. And now I've got other objects in the way, so I'm just going to move these out of the way, pressing 1 on the number pad. We're going to select our stairs objects. We're going to go over here to the right to the array modifier, and we're going to just mess with this, the X factor, just a little bit. We're going to try to get them touching here. And I think that might have done it. We're going to do -0.88. Actually, if we do -0.89, and then we can press this, we can select merge, and it should merge these vertices for us. And I think that's good so far. So I think this does what we want. So the modifier is still on it. If we close it, it'll go away. But if we go down here and press apply, it will apply the settings that we had. But I don't want to apply it yet because I think I'm going to duplicate this and mess with it a little bit more later. Just to begin with now, while we're trying to get the shape of the base out, we're going to press G to move it, lock it to the X and Y. Let's bring it over here. Let's press 7 to get the top-down view. Press R to rotate. That's a tool we haven't talked about. It's going to rotate around the origin point. If I go to edit mode and press A and I select everything, it's going to rotate around the medium spot for this object. But because we have this modifier not applied, it kind of messes up the orientation of the modifier, which doesn't really make any sense. So we're going to just rotate the whole object and try to place it to the best of our ability. Let's press 1. Let's grab this couch, move it out of the way, and then let's do our best to, I'm going to bring it up just a little bit higher because I think this is supposed to be like wood, like the top of the wood staircase, and we can have a bit of a space. We'll model that in later, but for now, we're just going to leave it like that. Let's press 7, going to top down. I'm in object mode, and I'm going to, let's press Shift Z. I'm going to select all these objects, and I'm going to press G. Lock it to the X-axis. Let's grab our main floor, go press Tab, go into edit mode. Let's press 2 to go to edge select, and I'm going to use a new tool. It's called loop cuts. We're going to add 2 loop cuts here. So I'm going to press Control R, and that's going to create a cut there. And then I'm going to press Control R again. It's going to bring another cut. If I go into face select, I can select this face that we just made. and then I can press G, and now we're moving this face, and I can lock it to the y-axis, and I can kind of bring it down here. Press 2 to go to edge select, select this edge, press E to extrude, X to lock it to the x-axis, and bring it this way. And now, so I'm thinking the player's gonna spawn here, and then they can like walk into the space. And maybe this is a bit of a weird space. In my head, I'm gonna have like all the entertainment stuff on the left side here, so there doesn't really need to be anything over here for this room. So I'm gonna grab this edge in edit mode, lock it to the y-axis. I'm just gonna bring it down. Maybe we can put like some plants or something, some potted plants over there as decoration, but for now I think that's all we need. So that's this room right now. We have a spawn point, so I'm using Shift, Tilde, and Tab to walk around the scenes. So the player can spawn here. The door's a bit big, but like I said, I like to keep things a bit big, and I've used this door in another one of my projects, so I know that I'm happy with the scale of this store. At least I was in that other project. So the player will spawn here, they can walk down, and then they're in this space. Maybe I'll bring this out just a little bit more. And the size of this space seems good. And then I want the player to be able to come over here to the left, and then kind of the main entertainment area for the space will be over here. And I kind of like the idea of the player having to step down into this area. I think that's a bit more interesting. So I'm going to go to the stair steps that we made, and I'm going to select that in object mode. I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate it. I'm going to press Shift Z to lock it to the X and Y axis. I'm going to bring it over here. Let's press 7 on the number pad, press R to rotate. And then I'm going to hold Control to lock it, or it's going to go to snap. When you press Control, it's going to do whatever the snap tool is selected. Right now it's on increment, so it snapped to like, I think 15-degree increment. You can change that up here somewhere probably. But also if we go down here, we can see that we changed it to -90 degrees. Pressing 3 on the number pad and pressing Shift Z, we can kind of go into the wireframe mode and see how we have it over here. And I'm just going to move it down and place it where I think it should be placed for the scene. If I go back to 7 on the number pad to get the top-down view, I can press Tab, go into edit mode. I can press A to select everything, and then press S to scale, X to lock it to the X-axis, and I'm going to scale this to fit this space. Going back into object mode, I'm just going to move it in to the best of my ability into the position that I want it. This doesn't have to be perfect, but for now, we're just going to try to get it to where I think it needs to be as we go along. We're going to be making things or fixing things up as we go. As we move forward, we'll be fixing things up. So things don't have to be perfect. Now, something that I don't like, especially when I start to build below the 0, point, is this grid system, or like the grid that's here. I think it can get pretty annoying. So you can actually change how your stuff looks by going up here to the top, go to viewport overlays, and I'm going to turn off the floor, and you can change all sorts of stuff in here. So I usually keep the X and Y lines on, but I turn off the floor. You can turn some other things on, like stats about your project. We'll play with more settings in there later, but for now, all I'm going to do is go up here, change the floor, turn off the floor because I don't want to see it. Now we have this space. So the player spawns here, they walk in here, and then I want them to walk down into this like entertainment space. I'm going to press Shift. I'm going to hold Shift in object mode. I'm going to press right click to move my cursor over here. Then I'm going to press Shift A to add a new mesh, and I'm going to add a new plane, and then it's going to bring it where our cursor is. So I'm going to press G, and I'm going to press G, then Y to lock to the Y axis. Then maybe press G, move it on the Z axis, bring it down a little bit. I kind of have it where I think I want it. I'm going to go into edit mode. Let's select these edges, press G, let's lock it to the X axis, select this edge, lock it to the X axis, and grab this edge, lock it to the Y axis, move it out. And now we've got something that looks like this. And the reason why I brought in these objects was so that I could place them in the scene. So maybe it will kind of look like this. This one is scaled a bit large, so let's bring that down just a little bit. Actually, I'm going to select all of these and scale them. So because I have multiple objects selected and I'm trying to scale, it's going to scale to the center point of all those objects. And we can change that. So if I did like Shift, right click, move my cursor there, I can actually change that by making the transform pivot point the cursor. So now if I scale, it scales wherever the cursor is. So that can be really helpful. And for this case, it is pretty helpful. I think that's about right. I'm going to change this back to be the medium point. And I'm going to move all of this out of the way. So if I kind of walk around here, I can kind of take a look at this and determine for myself if these couches are a good scale. And I think that they are. So I will leave it. This space feels a bit too wide. So maybe if in object mode, I'm going to select that. I'm going to select the stairs, and then I'm going to select this plane. I'm going to press tab to go into edit mode. Now I can edit all these objects in edit mode. I'm going to press 1 to select the vertices. I'm going to press Shift Z to go to the wireframe mode, and then I'm going to use my selection tool to select all these vertices here. And you can see I'm only selecting the vertices on these stairs on the bottom one. That's because it still has the modifier on there. So whenever I move those vertices, the array modifier is going to do its thing, and it's going to copy those changes to the other object that it's creating. But with that, let's press G, let's lock it to the x-axis, and let's move everything in just a little bit. And maybe let's grab this edge and bring this in. And I think that's a bit better. I think the next step I'm going to do is build the walls. So this is going to be very similar to the floor, maybe even a little bit easier. So let's press Shift, right click. I'm going to bring my cursor over here. I'm going to start with the door. I'm going to press Shift A. Let's bring in a new plane. And I'm going to press R to rotate. And I'm going to lock it to the x-axis. Then I'm going to hold Control so that I can have it snap directly to 90 degrees so that it's, straight up, because we want a straight wall. Pressing 7 on the number pad, I can press R again, Control, and I'm going to just bring it over here, and I'm going to do my best to place it where I want it. Pressing G to move it, pressing Z, X, and Y to lock it to the X-axis. So if I don't say what I'm doing, typically I'm pressing G to move and then locking it to some axis. Let's go into edit mode. Let's grab the edge, select this edge, move it over here, select this edge, G, Z. Let's press L. Let's select this whole plane, press Shift D to duplicate. Let's lock it to the y-axis and bring it to the side. I want this door as centered as possible, so let's select this edge and this edge. I'm going to press S to scale, and then we're going to lock to the y-axis. And we're just going to scale this out just a little bit. Let's go back to object mode. Let's select all the door pieces, G to move, and I'm just going to try to center this to the best of my ability. I'm just going to eyeball it. There's no need to get super perfect with anything. Typically when I'm modeling and doing stuff, I'm always just eyeballing everything. So if you look at my world and you start to notice things are a bit off-centered, that's why. Selecting this plane, going back into edit mode, pressing edge, selecting these top edges. Let's press E to extrude, Z to lock to the Z-axis, bring this up. Let's grab these edges, and now I want to fill this space, and the way that you do that is you just press F on the keyboard, and that's going to fill a space in between those two edges. So if I press G to move that up, you can see that it only filled the space between the two edges that we had selected. So let's go back to edge select. I'm going to select this whole thing. So there's a couple ways I can select all three of these edges. At the top here, I can hold Alt, select one edge, and that's going to give me the entire edge loop of the edge that I had selected. Or I can press one edge and press Control, then select the farthest edge that I want, and it's going to select all the edges in between that are closest. This doesn't just work for edges, this will work for faces and vertices, but we were in the edge select, so that's what we selected. So let's move this up just a little bit. I'm going to hold Alt, I'm going to select all these edges here, I'm going to press E to extrude. We're going to extrude this way, and then we're going to select both of those edges, press E to extrude. Lock it to the x-axis, bring it this way, and then I'm gonna go into wireframe by pressing Shift C. Let's select all of these, and then 7, and then we're just gonna bring these in to where they are both overlapping with the floor. Back to edge select, let's select both of these, and we're gonna press, now that we're at the stairs, or these are kind of off-centered a little bit, so if we go to the top-down view and go to the vertices select, you can kind of see these aren't at the same length, which is kind of a problem. So we can fix that by pressing S to scale, and then we can lock it to the x-axis. And then if we just scale this in, they kind of even out, but I can press 0 and that will do it for me. So that makes it quite easy. But from this point, so we've got this step down. There's an easy way to deal with this. We can press E to extrude, X to lock to the X-axis, and let's just move it all the way to the end spot that we want, and then we can select these edges at the bottom, press E to extrude, Z to lock it to the Z-axis, and now we've got no spaces. So just to kind of look, is this as far over as I want it? And I think this will do fine. So let's just select this edge now. And so if I do Alt edge select and I select all those edges, you'll see instead of just doing like just this, it now selects all the edges, and that's just kind of the way we've extruded this kind of makes the program think that all of this is one loop, which, you know, it is kind of. So we can't use Alt, but we can still like select the edge, press Control, and go all the way down there, or just select all of it manually. A lot of this stuff seems pretty arbitrary on like how you go about like moving things around, and for something like this it is, but when you have a mesh that is like a million bajillion vertices, a lot of these like different tools on how you can select things become a bit more important. It's good to model something small like this and kind of get used to all the tools that you have. But I'm done rambling. Let's go back to extruding this. Pressing E to extrude, lock it to the Y-axis. Let's bring it over here. We're just going to eyeball everything. Let's make sure that there's no gaps or anything. E to extrude, X to the X-axis. Let's G to move. Let's bring this over as much as we can. E to extrude. Let's bring it this way. And then let's select these edges. E to extrude. Let's bring it here. And let's select all of these. Going to top-down view by pressing 7 on the number pad. S to scale. Y to the Z-axis. Or Y to the Y-axis. Scale. S to scale. I'm getting confused. S to scale, 0 to 0, so that we can kind of even these out. E to extrude again. Let's bring this down. Let's select these edges. E to extrude, Z to the Z-axis. And now, because of the way that we've extruded everything and moved things around by pressing all, oh, no, it still does the whole thing. Never mind, ignore me. Select both these edges. G to move, lock it to the Y-axis. Let's bring it here. Now I want to join these, so let's just scale in the Y-axis to 0, just to make sure that they are at the same spot and they're like level with each other. I want to join these faces, but now instead of just having one face, by pressing F, we can join one face at a time. But if we have like everything here and we press F, it's going to create one plane for all these edges, but we have like multiple edges here. So I don't really want to do that. The way we can join these meshes together is we can select all those edges there, and then we can press, what can we press? We can right click and get a whole bunch of options now. And this, it's important that we're in edge select here. So you need to make sure you have all these edges selected. Right click. So if you're not in edge select, if you're not using the edge selection, these options are going to be different. But because we are in edge selection, we have this option here called bridge edge loops. We can press that, and that's going to basically fill all the edges that we have selected. And that's going to do what we want. Now we've got walls. We did it. Let's hover over our space. Let's press Shift tilde and let's fall into the scene, and let's just walk around a little bit. Let's get a nice idea of what we have going on here. We have a nice space. It's got pretty tall ceilings. Do I want taller ceilings? I actually think I want it to be lower in here and then taller out here, so that like when you enter, you're like going into an open space or a bigger space. So like if the spawn is a bit condensed, it kind of will subtle way to tell the player to get out of that area. So I'm going to press Alt and I'm going to select the top edge loop of edges, and then we're going to press G, and then we're going to press Z to lock it to the Z axis, and then we're going to bring it down. If I hold Shift, it kind of goes slower. So if I just kind of move up and down, it goes pretty fast. But if I hold Shift, I can kind of get a bit more precise. Not that we need to be precise here. It's just, you know, just trying to teach you. Just trying to teach you some tools. And now, back in edit mode, let's deselect these edges. And the way I do that is I hold Control and then I select the edges I don't want. And then I press E to extrude, and I'm going to lock through the Z axis. Let's bring this up just a little bit. And I want it to just be a little bit taller than what that hallway is, because these are already pretty tall. Like, these are kind of pretty tall ceilings already. We can select this edge and then this edge, and we can press F to join them together. And then I can select these, and grid fill won't really work for this because we've got multiple edges over here. So we kind of have to work around that a little bit. What's the easiest way to do this? I could just select that and press F. All right, we'll do that. This is kind of, this is fine. Let's select both these edges, press F, let's fill that, and now let's do Control R, bring in an edge loop, and I'm just going to do my best to line it up with this. And do the same thing over there. Pressing 1 to go to the vertices select. I can press Shift Z to go into the wireframe, and I want to join. So there's 2 vertices here, and I want to join them together so that they're connected. I'm going to press M. M is the keybind or the key shortcut for merge. So I'm going to select both these vertices, press M at center, and that's going to merge those. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. Select both of those, pressing M for merge, and press at center. And let's just do the same thing for this. So this should have connected the vertices over here. So if I do Control R to create 2 edge loops, or we'll just do 1 edge loop, and I'll try to line it up. It also, it takes the loop all the way around as far as it possibly can. So it takes it up here. We're going to do the same thing. Control R, bring it over here. Pressing 1 to go to the vertices select, Shift Z to go to wireframe. Let's select both of these vertices, pressing M to merge at center. Select both of these vertices, M at center, and so now we have a connected ceiling here. And so for this project, I was going to make the ceiling and the floor separate, but because this kind of opens up and these vertices kind of needed to be joined together, I decided to have the ceiling merged here, which is fine. But for over here, we can just bring in a different plane. So let's do that. Let's Shift right click. Let's bring the cursor over here. Let's do Shift A, let's bring in a new mesh, bring in a new plane, and we can take this plane and just kind of move it around, place it where we want it, press G to move it, Z to lock to the Z axis, pressing Tab, let's press 2 to go to the edge select this edge, G to move, Y to lock it to the Y axis, do the same thing, but this G to move, X to the X axis, and now this is a very much enclosed room. Have we done it? It's basically done. We did it. A room. But it's not complete. There's some important things that we still need to model to make it nicer. And there's something you should know about back faces before we move forward. When you bring in an object, so let's bring in a plane here. This plane has a front face and a back face. So this is a 2D plane. If the player is looking at this, they can see it on one side and not see it on the other side. I think by default, the top part is the front face and the bottom part is the back face. So how can you visualize that in Blender? There's a couple ways to do it. The first way to kind of check your meshes to make sure that all the front faces are facing the player or facing the right direction is you can go up here to the viewport overlays and you can go all the way down here to geometry and hit face orientation. This is going to tell you what the front face is and what the back face is. So let me just bring in another object. So here we have a cube. You can see all the faces that are pointed out from the cube are the front faces. But if we scroll into the cube here, everything inside is the back face. That means if the player was in here, they wouldn't see any of these faces. They would just see out from the cube. These faces are never facing the player, so the player would never see that. Why do you need to render it? Planes are the same thing, but they're 2D, so you need to be careful to make sure that the parts that you want the player to see, the player actually sees. You don't want the red parts to be facing the player. Now, the player is never going to be outside of this room, so everything in this room needs to be blue. And we can see that the ceiling is actually red. It's blue on the outside and red on the inside, which is what we don't want. So we can select this plane, and we can press Tab to go into edit mode. We still have this face orientation selected. We can select A to select everything. So we're in edit mode. We have this plane selected. We can go to mesh, go to normals, flip. And that's going to flip what the front face and the back face is. Let's delete this plane. We don't need it. Now, if we're inside this room, everything should be blue. And everything is blue. So we've done it. So now this red and blue is quite obnoxious. And I don't like to have it on. And the better way to check for front face and back, or there is no better way. It's just whatever you prefer. What I prefer is to, in solid view, I like to change my settings for the viewport shading for solid view. And I like to, if I hit this down arrow, I can go to options and I can click on backface culling. That means whatever the backface is, it's not going to show that to me in Blender. So now that that's turned off, all the parts that are back facing are disappeared to me. So now I can kind of see inside this room. It's a bit easier for me to maneuver around Blender. I think I can kind of see what's going on a bit better. And if I come into the room and walk around, you can see that it is an enclosed room with all the walls facing the appropriate direction. So we have a room here, and this, hypothetically could be good enough for VRChat, but it's not good enough for me. So we're going to go in here, we're going to add a bit more details. Let's start with the steps. I want these to be a bit nicer, so I'm going to just select one of these. I'm going to press tab to go into edit mode, and I want these steps to kind of have a curve on the outside here. So in edit mode, I'm going to press 2 for edge select. I'm going to select this edge and this edge, and then I'm going to use the bevel tool. So to do that, I can press, in edit mode, I can press Control B, and it's going to give me this option. If I use the scroll wheel, I can change how many increments of bevel there are. I don't need that many, maybe 2 will work. And because it still has the array modifier on it, it's doing it to the top one as well. After we use the bevel tool, before we click off of anything, we get a bunch of options down here that we can kind of play with if we wanted to, but the default settings are more than good enough for me. Let's do the same thing to this one. Select that edge, select this edge, Control B. Perfect. One thing I don't like is how you can see each edge, or each face, it's quite sharp. So if I right click in object mode, I can right click, press shade smooth. It's going to smooth the whole thing out. I can go to this object, this little green triangle on the right menu here. It's called object data properties. If I click that, I can go down to normals and I can do auto smooth. So that's going to find any angle that's more than this degree and it's going to make it sharp. We can increase that by doing just increasing the degree to 45. So anything that's bigger than a 45-degree angle, it's going to make it a sharp angle. You could see that this here, these vertices are joined, but it's a 90-degree angle. So because it's bigger than 45 degrees, it is sharp. But these beveled edges are smaller than 45 degrees, so they are not sharp. You can do the same thing to that, shade smooth. Change that to 45 and it looks pretty good. I think I'm done with these steps. They look pretty good. I'm going to go to the modifier and I'm going to press Control A to apply, or I can just hit this. So Control A, apply. Do the same thing to this one, Control A, and now I want to finish off the little wood piece here. So if I select this edge in edit mode, press E to extrude, bring it down, and now there is no gaps between the steps and the floor there. And we're going to do the same thing here. Do these overlap? They don't. So let's move that over just a little bit. E to extrude, Z, bring it down. I think that looks pretty good. We kind of have the scale down, so I have all these objects in here. We don't really need them, so I'm just going to delete those that are kind of just floating out in space to get rid of them. We have them as FBX, so if we did, hypothetically needed them again, we could just import them again, but I don't think we need them. So I'm just going to, I don't even think we need this, but I'll keep that in here just because it kind of makes this space look a bit more complete. The next thing I want to do is focus on the trims around the ceiling and the floor. Now the ceiling, I think we can do a bit more with it. I'm going to select, so I'm selecting the ceiling object. I'm going to press tab to go into edit mode, 3 to select the face. So I'm going to select this face of the ceiling and I'm going to press I. I is the inset tool, and that's going to let us bring in basically a cube or a square within this, or a rectangle within this rectangle. And I'm just gonna press I, bring it in a little bit, something like that. Press E to extrude, bring this up just to make this a bit more interesting. I think I like that. And then now I want to do the trim that's around the ceiling. So an easy way to do that is I'm going to just select this edge loop that we had created. I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate it. Right click on the mouse to bring it back to its original point. I'm going to press P and I'm going to separate this by selection so that what we have selected is now going to become its own object. So if we go back into object mode, I can now select only this object. So now we should have something like this. There's a lot of unnecessary cuts in here, so I'm going to grab the edge loops by pressing Control Alt. And it's going to grab all these edges around this loop. but we only want to grab the edges we don't need. So I'm going to hold Control and I'm going to select that edge. I want that one. I want that one. I need all the corner edges. Everything else I can get rid of. So the way you get rid of these edges is I can press X, which is like our delete, but we're in edit mode, so now we've got a bit more options here. We can dissolve these edges, and by doing dissolve, it's just going to kind of make those edges disappear. So now we only have the 4 faces around this. Going back into object mode, we can come over here to the wrench, go to add modifier. We're going to add a different modifier. This time we're going to add something that's called the solidify modifier. And that's going to make this a solid object. So if I increase the thickness, you can see that it's getting bigger, but it's kind of getting bigger in the wrong direction. The way we fix this is by flipping the normals of this object. So if we press tab and go into edit mode, we can press A to select everything. We can go to mesh, normals, and flip, just like we did before. And now the modifier is affecting this object in a bit of a different way, to where the solidify modifier is making it solid in the other direction, if that makes sense. One thing to watch out is if you look at the corners of this from the solidify modifier, it kind of bends it a little bit. So I like to come over here to the settings, press even thickness. That's going to make sure that each face is the same thickness all the way around, you know, to the best of its ability. This mesh is pretty simple, so should be fine. I think something like this is a good distance. I don't want this to be this low. So in edit mode, I'm going to press 2 for edge select. I'm going to select this bottom edge, and I'm just going to bring this up a little bit. And we may have to edit this a bit more, but I think this is fine for, should be fine for now. I'm trying to make this kind of, I'm trying to get this length to be the same as this length, if that makes sense. And I think that's pretty close. So we'll do something like that, and we'll apply this. And now I want to bevel this corner. So I'm going to go into edit mode, edge select, pressing Alt. Let's grab only this edge loop on the end here and press Control B for the bevel. And we're going to increase this by quite a bit. We're going to bevel this to something like that. Now this looks kind of silly. I don't actually want to bevel this, but I can change the settings here. If I go to shape, and I can kind of bring this to, let's try 0.1. And now it's a concave bevel, which looks a bit better. And if we right click on this in object mode, press shade smooth, go down to the object data properties, go to auto smooth, 30 degrees should be fine. And now this looks like it's a pretty simple, I think, nice looking trim. One thing I don't like about this is it has faces here pointed outside of the room, so the player is never going to see these faces, and there's no point in having them there to be rendered in the scene. So we can go ahead and delete that. And while it's not that complicated in terms of like where this is positioned, but sometimes when you have a lot of meshes in your project, it can kind of be hard to get to certain things or see it properly. And so an option I like to use that not a lot of people, I think, talk about when they're doing Blender stuff is this / on the number pad. This will isolate whatever object you have selected. So by pressing that, I can toggle out of it. Pressing an object that I want to see and edit, I can press the / on the number pad, isolate it. Now I can go into edit mode. I can press 3 for face select. I can select all the faces that I want to get rid of for this object. Press X, delete faces, and then I can press / on the number pad and go back. And so I think that looks just a bit cleaner. We got rid of some faces that the player is never going to see, and I think that looks pretty good. Now let's do the trim for the bottom. Now this one's a bit more complicated because we've got like this hallway, we've got stairs, so it's not as simple, but same concept. So let's look at our wall. Let's see, can we do anything here with this? I think this is the simplest loop that we can grab, and we can kind of just edit off of here. So let's grab this loop. Let's press Shift D to duplicate, right click on the mouse to bring it back to its original point. Press P to separate. That's P is the shortcut for separate. Press selection, and now if we go back to object mode by pressing tab, we can select this. Going back into edit mode, we can now make our changes to this. I would say let's get rid of all the edges we don't need, but we actually might need those. So let's keep those there. Let's go to the modifier properties by hitting that wrench and going down to solidify. We're going to press even thickness. Let's just bring this out. And once again, it's kind of extruding this out in the wrong direction. So we can go into edit mode, select everything, go to mesh, go to normals, press flip, and it brings it in now. Let's bring this in, and this trim is it's a bit too big for me, so I'm just gonna grab these edges and try to make it a size that I like. And this is a bit too thick. Maybe we do something like this. I think that looks good. Now we have to deal with the stairs here. So if I press 1, I can go to vertices select. Kind of makes it a bit easier to see everything. I can go on this side. I can press Control R to add a loop cut. I'll add a loop cut there. I'm going to press Control R, add a loop cut here. Let's grab both those vertices, and I can press G to move Y to the Y-axis. You can also double press G, and it will move these vertices along the normals. I'm going to bring it to something like a little bit in front of the stairs. Let's press 3 for face select. Let's select these faces and press G, lock to the Z-axis. Let's bring this down. And I'm going to bring this just down enough so that it hits the floor. And I think that's looking good. I don't want the corners of these stairs to be above the trim. So I think we are good with that. Now there is a bit of space below, like this right here, and we don't want that. So what I typically do is I'll go to edge select, I'll select both these edges, then I'll press E to extrude, Z to the lock to the Z axis, and it will just kind of bring it down. Maybe I'll do scale Z0 to make it a bit cleaner, but I think that looks good. And now we need to deal with it over here. So let's press 1, let's grab these vertices, G, lock it to the X axis, let's bring it this way. Instead of adding loop cuts like we did on the other side, we can press E to extrude, lock it to the X-axis, bring this up, press G, lock it to the Z-axis, and let's place this in a spot that kind of makes sense, and I think that looks good. And now let's just finish this out a little bit. Let's press E to extrude, bring it this way, locking it to the X-axis. Let's press E to extrude again, pressing Y, and I'm just going to bring these in. I'm going to select these faces by going to the face selection tool, press G to move, lock it to the X-axis. Let's bring this in. And I think that looks good. And we're going to do the same thing to these edges that we did over on the other side. Perfect. I think we can apply the solidifier. And the trim is good, but there's a lot of faces here that the player does. Like, we don't need all these faces here, and there's a considerable amount of them. A lot more than the trim for the ceiling. So pressing / on the number pad, I can isolate them. Pressing 3. I'm going to select all these faces that I don't need. Holding Control, I can select multiple in a line like that. And I'm just going through here and going to do my best to select all the faces that I don't need. I don't need these, so I can delete those faces. And because now there's no completed loop, I can just hold Alt, select all these faces, and should select all the bottom ones if I did it correctly, and I think I did. So X, delete faces. That's pretty good. We can still make this a bit more interesting. Let's press, so in edit mode, pressing 2 for edge select, holding Alt, selecting this edge loop of edges. Let's make sure I've got it all, and then I can use the bevel tool, Control B, and using the scroll wheel I can change how many there are. Right click in object mode, shade smooth, auto smooth 30, maybe smaller. That look good, maybe yes, maybe no. I'm just looking at it now, trying to determine whether I like it or not, and I think I do. Perfect, that's our room. I think that's everything in terms of modeling the base out. Now we just need to put textures on it and get it ready for Unity. Like I had mentioned before, that the main goal of what I'm trying to build in Blender for my VRChat world to begin with is the base of the world. I don't want, so like this couch I would consider a prop. The door I would consider a prop. I don't want to worry about props yet. That will all come into Unity separately and later. And also, we're not going to model anything as detailed as this couch or the door. We're just going to focus on the base and getting that into Unity, and you'll see how I bring in separate props for Unity. And even when I make props myself, which I pretty much always do, I always bring it in after the fact. So we're just focusing on the base here, and as things stand, we have a base. Now I had jumped ahead a little bit here and I added some lights, so let's ignore that. Here we are in the regular view that you were just seeing me edit in. What I do like to do often as I'm working on worlds is I don't always just sit in the solid viewport option. I'll go into the render viewport shading, so that way I can kind of see lights in the scene and kind of get an idea of what it's going to look like when I do bring it into Unity. So the way I do that is you just switch to the render viewport setting, and then let's use shift, right click, move the cursor somewhere, press shift A, and we can bring in lights. So I'm just going to bring in a point light, and I typically like my worlds being like warm tones, so we're going to make this a warm tone light. Let's increase the power, and we're just going to move this like we would move any other object, and pressing shift D, duplicate, and I'm just going to do shift D, duplicate this all over the scene, just to have lights in the scene existing. And so that is kind of how I got to that viewing. So this feels better, you know. It's nice to go through your project and kind of see all your work laid out and lit properly. It looks really cool, makes me feel good, but there's still a lot more to do. We need to texture this. We need to find textures to add. We need to UV unwrap this, and we need to get this ready to be exported to Unity. There are lots of places where you can find textures for your projects. One of my favorite places to go is ambientcg.com. They have Creative Commons licensed textures, and they're all free. You can use them in your projects, upload them to VRChat, and include them in packages if that's what you want to do. All of this is free. This is where I pull a lot of textures from Ambient CG, and I recommend, if you're going to use them, to be a Patreon supporter of theirs like I am. This is a great resource if you need textures. So we're just going to go in here and we're going to look for textures. I've actually already downloaded some textures from this site that we're going to use on the project, so I'll show you that in Blender. But if you need textures, come over here and look through all their textures, pick some stuff out that you like, and you can try it in the scene. And I'll show you how you can add textures from, or how you can add textures from anywhere and bring them into your Blender project. The textures I chose for this project are a combination of textures I got from Ambient CG and my own textures. So this carpet came from Ambient CG. This wood floor, I think parts of it might have came from Ambient CG. I pulled these from my last my McMansion project, so I believe I made these three, but this was made to match one of Ambient CG's floor textures. If you want these specifically, I will also include those in the description, so they'll be included with all the other files that I'm giving out for this project. So let's go back to Blender. So this whole time we've been working in this either layout. I think by default you're in the modeling viewport, but this whole time we've just been in like one tab, and now by default Blender has all these different tabs that you can go into, and we are going to want to go into the shading tab. So click shading, and here, so by default it'll put us in the material preview viewport shading option. Down here in the node editor is where we can begin to add textures to the project. To do that, to add a texture to an object, we need to make sure that that object has a material. So we are going to, let's just look at the store just as an example. And before I do that, let me make sure my screencast is turned on, and now you can see everything. It's showing up all right here. We're going to move this to the side because we really need to focus on stuff over here, the node editor, and the main view section. So let's just look at the store as an example. We have this store. We imported it into this project. We have the store, and in this store we have a couple materials on it. This one is not needed. It's leftover from something else. We can ignore it. But this store has a material on it. And on this material, if we go to the node editor, we can kind of see what's going on with this material. This material is using a combination of texture images to appear on this object. If we want our objects to have textures on it, we need to select our object. So let's just start by selecting the stairs here, and if we are in the material properties over here on the right, and we can see that there are no materials, so we can create a new one. So we're going to press new, and now it's going to create a new material. It named it for us. It's called material 0.001. We're going to rename that. This is going to be our wood texture. The wood texture I have, we're going to put on the stairs. So we're going to rename this to wood floor. And by default, your wood floor material will look like this, or your new material will look like this. It's just basically an empty node, basically saying that the color is white. That's basically all this is saying. So we need to add textures. If we change this, you can kind of see it changes the color of your object. So this is changing the color of the material, and this material is on our object, so it's changing the color of that. We need to add, for our wood texture, we need to add our wood texture and plug it into this base color. So let's do that. Just like in the other view where you press Shift A to add a new mesh, we can press Shift A to add a new node. We're going to go to texture, hit image texture, and then we're going to press open, and then we're going to go find where we save those textures, and mine saved here. We're going to click the albedo transparency. That is the basically the albedo, and then we're going to take this color and we're going to plug it into the base color. Now it looks kind of crazy, and that is because we haven't unwrapped this mesh yet. We're not going to worry about that just yet. We're going to just get these materials in. We'll mess with unwrapping in a moment. Just know the color of this wood popped up on here. It is on this material, and that's what's important. So we're going to take this. We also need to get the roughness information from this texture and the normal information from this texture and get it onto our material. So the way we do that, because we have a roughness map and we have a normals map, as textures we need to pull those textures into. So the way we can do that is we can select this node, we can press Shift D to duplicate, we can bring it down, hit this little folder, find a new texture. We're going to bring in the metallic smoothness. Now let's bring this over here. This texture is pretty specific to Unity. It's exported out for Unity to fit with Unity shaders. That means the information that's on this texture for smoothness is in your alpha. It's like an inverted alpha setting. And to translate that into Blender, we need to basically take the alpha information from this texture sheet. And this is different for depending on what kind of files you have. This is just kind of specific to what we have downloaded here. For stuff that you downloaded off of Ambient CG, you might just want to wait a moment because we're going to get to something that is more similar to that. But for this specific texture, we need to take the alpha information, invert it, and plug it into roughness. That's just how it needs to be translated in Blender. So we are going to press Shift A to add a color node, invert, bring that in, bring this alpha, bring it to color, bring this color, bring it to roughness, and now we've got the appropriate wood roughness information here. And now if you want to take the metallic information that's here, even though there's no metallic information because it's wood, it's not a metallic object, but if you want to get that information, you would just drag it to metallic. Now we need a normal map. We can duplicate this, we can find our normal texture, bring that in, and now we need to press Shift A, go to vector, normal map, and basically all this node does is it tells the program that it says, hey, this texture is actually a normal map. So let's plug that in, bring this and bring it over to normal. I like to change it to linear. I think that ends up making it look normal, like actually normal. I think it has to do with the type of normal I export from Substance, which is why it needs to do that. I'm not really sure, to be honest. I just kind of do what works, and that works. But now we have a functioning material here that has the proper map on it. So our wood material is now fine, and we can take this wood. Now we still have these stairs selected in object mode. We can kind of move over here, and we can grab this and we can drag it over to the other stairs and apply this material to this object. Let's bring in the carpet. So let's choose this plane. We'll just throw the carpet material in here. We can press new again. It's gonna create a new material just like it did last time. It's applying to this object that we have selected, and we're gonna change this. We're gonna call this carpet, and we're going to basically do the same thing. Now this one's a bit different, so if we bring this over, if I go to textures and I go to carpet, you can see that we've got some more textures here and there's more stuff going on. So we have, instead of like albedo transparency, we have base color. So this texture, or these textures, weren't exported at the same settings as the other one. The other one was kind of more specific to, Unity. While there are shaders in Unity that can handle these textures, no problem. These are kind of just general roughness, metallic, separate, everything's separate. That's all. They can still work in Unity, as you will see. But the way we apply this to our node system is a bit different. It's kind of the same. So let's do Shift A in the node editor. Go to texture, image texture. Let's go to open. We're going to go to textures. We're going to find this carpet base color. And we need to bring the color into the color option. You can see it applies it there. It's kind of crazy because we haven't unwrapped this yet, and that's okay. We'll get there. We can take this node, Shift D, duplicate. Now let's bring in the roughness. We're going to find the roughness texture, bring that in. And now this is just roughness information. We don't need, it's not in the alpha anywhere. It's not hidden in the texture somewhere. We can just take the color and drag it over to roughness. And this is how, if you download textures from Ambient CG, this is typically how it's going to be. We don't have any metallic information. We don't need to bring that in. We do have normals. I'm not going to worry about height information also in Blender. We're just going to bring in the normal, and then we're going to call it a day with this texture or this material. So let's go to vector, normal map. Let's drag this into normal. Let's bring this over to the normal node. And we may not have to change this to linear. Yeah, I don't think it matters for this. And now we've got this texture in, and it looks crazy. Everything looks crazy now because we haven't unwrapped anything, so we don't really have to worry about any of that. But if you want to apply this to all the parts where I want the carpet, so we can kind of just take this and drag it onto all the objects that we want. And that's good for now. I'm pressing Control S just to save. Let's grab the walls. So now we're going to create a new material. We're going to call this, let's call it drywall. And we're going to do the same thing. Let's add an image node, new, open, textures, drywall, albedo transparency. So this is similar to the first texture that we used. Duplicate this image node. Let's find the metallic smoothness. Let's go to color, invert, because that smoothness information is in the alpha, and smoothness is opposite of roughness. So we need to invert it and bring that over to the roughness. Let's duplicate that. Let's go to vector, normal map. Let's find the normal texture, bring that in. Color to the normal map here, and let's change this to linear. And now the drywall texture is on the walls, and we also want it on the ceiling, so let's go ahead and drag it over to the ceiling. And we might have to add it to something else that I'm forgetting. Maybe not. I think it's good. Now let's do the trim. Select the trim in object mode, go to new. Let's call this trim. Let's get rid of that. Shift A, go to textures, image texture, open, textures. Trim, albedo transparency, it's just like the other textures, so we duplicate that, we go to metallic smoothness. Now the smoothness is in the alpha, so we need to add an invert node, bring the smoothness is opposite of roughness, so we need to invert it, pull it from the alpha, bring it into smoothness. Grab this image texture node, Shift D to duplicate, go to the folder, find the normals, Shift A, vector, normal map, let's grab color to color. Linear, normal. It's hard to see that we did anything, but the material is on this object, so it should be fine, and we can drag it to the other trim. And you can see subtly it changed, so that's a good signifier that it is on there. And let's go back to layout or modeling. Let's go back to modeling. Let's go to the render view. Let's just check it out in here. The next thing to do is to go ahead and unwrap all these objects and actually get it to look normal. Just like we had to go to the shading tab to create the materials in the node editor, we can go to the UV editing tab to UV editing. UV editing, let's go, okay, so we're in the UV editing tab. Let's go over to the material preview so we can see our materials. UV editing is where we take the 3D meshes that we made and we flatten it onto a 2D surface so that the information from the textures can be projected over the meshes. In object mode, let's grab our floor. And in fact, actually, I kind of want all the floors to be joined together. So to join objects together, I was going to get to this a little bit later at the end, but I think it might be important to do it now. So everything is uniform. In object mode, let's select all the carpet floor pieces. So holding Shift, right click, or left click, Shift, left click, and then we're going to press Control J, and that's going to join all of our objects together. Now if we press tab for edit mode, we can see how our object is unwrapped right now. And it looks confusing, honestly. But that's why our texture on here looks also very confusing, because it's all not unwrapped properly. Let's look over in the unwrap section. Basically, everything you see over here should correspond with the objects you have over here. So I'm going to press / on the number pad just to isolate this object to make this a bit easier to see what I'm doing. Everything I select in the 3D part should correspond with what I have selected over in the 2D part. So if I grab this, you can see it's this, and as I move this this, so I selected this face. You can see I have it selected over here in the 2D part as well. And as I move it over in the 2D section, nothing happens over here except that the texture changes. So we can see here is part of my texture here. Let's actually bring the base color so you can see as I move this face over the texture, it changes how it looks on here. If I select this face is kind of crazy. That's because it's all squished on the texture. And if I move this around, you can see it corresponds with what I'm doing over here. You can also change how this is viewed. So right now, this is only showing the faces that you have selected in your scene or in this collection. But if you want to see all the faces in the 2D mode, you can come up here, switch this to that, and this will have everything here. So it will always display everything here. We need to unwrap this and project this onto this texture so that it makes sense. One thing to note is when you have a texture like this, or with all textures, they always repeat infinitely in all directions. So if I have this here, if I move this one over, it's basically overlaying on top of another one of this over on this side. That's why it kind of looks the same. To unwrap, you press U, that's the hotkey, and then press unwrap. So this is going to take all your faces and unwrap it to the best of, well, it's going to unwrap it based on where your seams are. Now we have no seams in here. So it's just going to lay out these planes, and these are pretty simple shapes to unwrap. So it's just going to lay out these faces onto the 2D object. So let's press U, let's press unwrap, and you can see that it recreated all these faces on here, just how they are laid out in this section. So if I grab this edge, press E and extrude, and now there's all of a sudden this new face here. It's not really showing up over here. Let's press A to select everything, press U, unwrap, and now you can see it kind of fixed that mistake. But we don't need that, so we can kind of just select everything, press U, unwrap. Nothing looks weird, it's just the carpet is like way too big. And we don't need the carpet to be that big, so we can select everything, go into the 2D view and press S, and we can scale this up. And the texture is just going to repeat infinitely behind it, and we can kind of just scale it until the carpet looks somewhat normal. And I think somewhere around here it's getting there. So let's just do that. Let's press / on the number pad. We're back in object mode. We can go back into this view, and if we go to the render mode, we can kind of see how the light is affecting it. And because we're in a different tab, it's added my floor back, which I don't like, so I'm just going to get rid of that. But I think for the carpet, it looks good. Now let's select these stairs. I'm going to press Shift in object mode. I'm going to select those stairs, and I'm going to press Control J to join them together. And let's go back to the material view and then press / and let's unwrap this as well. So we can select everything like we did with the carpet, press U, unwrap, and it unwraps it based on our seams. Now we don't have seams, so it did it based on this object just is built in such a way to where it can unwrap easily. Let's go ahead and find the wood texture, and you can see as it, we're looking at this face here, and the grain is kind of going in the wrong direction. So we can press A, select everything, press R, hold Control, just like when we were modeling, and rotate this on the 2D texture, and we can scale this up as well to something that makes a bit more sense. And I think this looks good. So when we unwrap this, it basically just took this whole thing and flattened it out. And that you can see that's what it did here. Now, we're going to do this with the next 3D mesh, but just to give you an idea of what happens when we add seams. When we add seams, the seams basically tell the program to cut the mesh here so that it can unwrap better. Now, it's not needed for this object, but just for demonstration purposes, let's, in edge select an edge, and I'm going to press mark seam, and it's going to turn red. And then if I select this object and I press U, unwrap, now there's 2 objects here unwrapped. So that's what seams does, and that's going to be important for the next mesh, which you'll see. So I'm actually just going to select this and get rid of that. The steps are good. Let's go forward with the walls. We're going to do the walls and the ceiling. So I'm going to select in object mode, I'm selecting the walls and the ceiling. I'm going to press Control J. And the reason why I'm joining them and I'm unwrapping them together is because they're using the same material. And since this is a seamless texture, and I'm going to be scaling the object on the 2D plane, I'm going to be scaling the object in the UVs. I want them to be the same. Let's go back to the material view. Let's do / on the number pad. Let's just select everything and try to unwrap this, and you can kind of see what happens. So things look a bit weird here, and that's because it's trying to take this entire shape and flatten it out onto this object, but it's not as flat as the other stuff that we use. There's like there's this hallway here, which is like a inverted cube. So we're gonna need to put seams in here to help this flatten out. A place we can start is right here, so we can select all these edges and edge select. I'm in edit mode. I'm gonna press U. I'm gonna press mark seam, and let's select everything and unwrap, and you can see that kind of separated some stuff and made it a bit better, but it's still trying to flatten this whole thing out. So we need to maybe add another one right here. Let's press U, mark seam. So press A, select everything, unwrap. So now this looks much better. This is able to fold out because it's cutting here, and it's not including the hallway. It's able to take all of these walls here and flatten it out onto the UV seam. So that's good. Now we're having issues with this ceiling because of this inset, or this extruded like inset here. So we can kind of deal with that by selecting this edge loop. Maybe let's add a seam there. We can select just the center part, press U, mark seam, and maybe just like how this folds out by us adding a seam here, we can maybe add a seam right here, and this top, like these faces here, can fold out. So let's select everything. Let's see what that did for us. U, unwrap, and that's pretty good. So everything's looking much cleaner. And the last thing we need to focus on is this hallway. So I think if we just separated the entrance walls here, I think it'll allow these walls here to fold out nicely. So let's select everything, press U, go to unwrap, and I think that did it. You can't really see much detail on the drywall, but if we go to the normal, we can kind of see a bit more. Just like we did, I'm going to rotate this. Just like we did with the other ones, we are going to press S to scale. We're going to scale this up, and this probably needs to be a considerable amount bigger. Let's press / on the number pad and go into the light mode, and I think that will make it a lot easier to see the detail on the drywall. So you can kind of see it there. Scale it up a bit more. We're just going to pick something that ends up looking good, and I think that looks good, so we'll leave it there. And the last thing that we have to do is the trim sheet. So I'm going to select this top trim, hold shift in object mode, select this bottom trim, press Ctrl J to join these together, and then we are going to go back to the material view, / on the number pad, and we are going to press 2 for edge select, and then all these corner edges I'm going to select. So I'm holding shift in edit mode, and I'm going to select all these corner edges, and I'm going to, these are basically where I'm going to end up putting my seams, and I don't think I need ones there. Selecting all of the corners. That is all of them. Pressing U, mark seam, pressing A, U, unwrap. So this ended up being a little weird, but I think we can work with this. So if we press U, unwrap, if you look at the bottom in the window that you unwrapped it, you can press this and you can actually change the method on how it unwraps. And so this is using angle based. I think if we change it to conformal, it will be a bit better, and I do think this looks way better. So yeah, that looks good. Everything's a little bit crooked. We can fix that. So I'm going to rotate this, make it this way, even though it doesn't really matter. I think my trim texture is the same, like the normals for it is the exact same as the drywall. So I'm just going to use this normals to kind of orient it. And I'm just going to try to straighten out some of these unwraps, though I don't think it will make a big difference. So let's press / on the numpad again. Let's go back to the rendered view to make it a bit easier to see what changes we do. Let's selecting the trim, going to edit mode, pressing A to select everything, pressing S to scale. I'm just going to scale this up by quite a bit. And it's a bit difficult to see what we did, but I think it doesn't look bad. So, that's probably a good sign. That's basically it. Now, so the objects I had brought in, like this door, we're going to bring that into Unity, and we don't need it right now. So I'm just going to delete it. We don't need these objects. I'm just going to keep in here what we need. Let's go back to the modeling section. So that's unwrapping. I feel like it's the hardest section for me to explain to people what is going on. But hopefully you were able to follow and understand what we were doing. If you do get confused or need help, my Discord is in the description, or you could just comment and I'll try to help you. But it's unwrapping and you got to do it. And we're not done yet with unwrapping. We need to do a bit more unwrapping when we get to light baking, but we will talk about that when we get to it in Unity. But for now, the textures on here look good. The meshes are unwrapped. So typically I try to keep some things separate, but we're going to join some of these objects together. So I'm going to grab the stairs and the carpet. We're going to press Control J, and now we've joined those together. And if we go to this object data property, go to normals. Now before on the stairs we had auto smooth, but because we joined it to the carpet mesh, it got rid of our auto smooth. So we can kind of fix that by turning that back on. Let's do 45. So now everything that is the floor is connected, and I'm gonna select the trim and the walls, and I'm gonna join these together. And once again, I got rid of our auto smooth, so we can just turn that back on, and I'm just gonna bring it up to like 65% or something like that. And now all the walls are joined together, and so we really only have 2 objects in here now. So I'm gonna rename these. I'm gonna call this walls, and then I'm gonna call this floor. And that's the base of this world. So this, I'm going to use this very loosely. This is ready to go into Unity now. We can export this out. This can look good in Unity. There are still some things we need to do to this, but I don't want to do it yet because I think it gets a bit confusing and you're not going to really understand why I'm doing certain things until we get there. So when we get to those points, we'll come back into Blender and we'll mess with what we need to mess with. But for now, I believe that this is ready to be exported. I'm going to select both these objects. So I've got the walls here, and then I'm going to hold shift in object mode. I'm going to select the floor. I'm going to go to object, and I'm going to change the origin point to just be the center. So set origin to center of mass. While selecting both of those, I'm going to press Control A, and I'm going to apply rotation and scale. So that means the reason why I apply rotation and scale is because sometimes you can scale things in Blender in object mode, and it can make, you really notice this with UV editing or like with where the origin direction is in Unity. Just to make sure everything is uniform and lines up, Shift A, Control A, applying rotation and scale will like kind of reset everything. But yeah, this is ready to go into Unity, so let's export that out. This is now ready to be exported to Unity, so we're going to go ahead and do that. The only thing I need from this project, so if you look over in the scene collection, I deleted the couch and the other stuff, but the only things that we really need are the walls and the floor and all these point lights, and if there was anything else in this project, I don't really need that. So I just need the walls, which includes all the walls and the ceiling, and then the floor. So I'm going to select the walls by left click, and then I'm going to hold Control and I'm going to select floor. And now we've got both these objects selected. And we are going to go over to File, Export, FBX. And I'm going to come over here and I'm going to limit to selected objects. And I'm going to select Mesh. One thing to note about Blender versus Unity is objects in Blender have a different like scale property than Unity does. So you've got this apply transform here. If you click that, that means things in Unity, and if you're a beginner, this may not make a lot of sense, but if you click apply transform, it means the objects that are in Blender will be scaled to 1 in Unity. If you don't hit this, it means things will be, I think, rotated at 90 degrees and scaled to 100 because it just comes into the program a little bit differently. It's got this little error or this exclamation mark because I think this is an experimental feature in Blender, at least in the version that I'm using. I'm not going to press this. I just kind of wanted to mention it. I'm not going to press it. We're going to export it just like normal. To export it out, I'm going to actually go to my folders and I'm going to find the folder I want to export to. I'm going to press Control-Shift-N and create a new folder. I'm going to call it FBX. We're going to do that, and then if I just reload this, you can see that new folder is there. Let's press FBX, and we'll just keep the name the same. Press Export FBX, and now if we go to that folder, hit FBX, we can see we have our object here. So whether or not it exported properly, we don't really know yet because we haven't looked at it, but we will import it into Unity and we'll check it out. So let's create a new VRChat project. You're going to want to open up the VRChat Creator Companion. At the beginning of the tutorial, I said that I was going to assume that you have this software downloaded. Once again, if you don't have that or you don't know how to go about getting it and you don't have the proper version of Unity, check the description in the video and there's going to be a link to a video that will help you get that stuff. But I'm going to assume you've got the right version of Unity, it's all set up, and you've got the Creator Companion. So we're going to open up the Creator Companion and we're going to go over here to the top right, press Create New Project, go to Worlds 2022. We're going to call this Tutorial Entertainment Room. And then we are going to pick a folder where we want to save it. I'm going to save it. I'm going to create a new folder in here. I'm going to call it Unity. And let's click that. Let's select that folder. And we are going to press Create Project. And this is going to basically take all the packages that you need to create a VRChat world in Unity. It's going to import that into your project. It's going to take a second, and then once it's done, you're going to see the packages that you have in your project. By default, it adds the SDK, package resolver, and the SDK base. Now there's a whole bunch of other stuff in here that you can add. Some of it is stuff that I've added separately. Some of it comes with VRChat. We're not going to focus on anything else other than what comes in by default. So once that's done, let's press Open Project. Now this will take, the first time you open up your project, it's going to take a little bit longer because it needs to import all these packages actually into the project. Right now, they're just kind of sitting in the folder. Unity's got to compile everything and go through all the scripts. Press Open Project, give it a sec, and it will open up. When it's done loading, you should see a screen like this, and if it imported the SDK properly, you should be seeing this like scene with the udon stuff, and then up at the top left, you should have this VRChat SDK drop down. For all the people that are new to Unity, we're going to go over the controls just a little bit. The controls are a little different than in Blender, and I don't have screencast to show you the buttons that I'm pressing. So as we go through, we're going to be messing with a lot of tools that are in Unity, and I'm going to do my best to explain what I'm doing, what you need to click. But just for the beginning, you should see something. I think this is the default setup. In the center is like your game. This is called the scene window. If you right click on the mouse, you can rotate around, you can rotate your camera around, and your camera view is going to pivot around like where the camera is, if that makes sense. Using the scroll wheel, you can go in and out. Clicking the mouse button, you can drag across the scene. And if you right click on the mouse and then you use WASD and then scroll wheel, you can fly around your scene, and then the scroll wheel will increase how fast or slow you move around the scene. Holding shift will let you go faster, and those are the basic ways you move around the scene. So if we go to the left, we're going to see our inspector, everything, or not the inspector, we're going to see the hierarchy, and everything that's in here is going to show you everything that's actually in your scene. If we click this, we can see that we've selected the floor that is in your scene. This event system is in your scene. This is like something for the VRChat default scene. If we go to the directional light, this is the light that's in the scene. Main camera, this is like your game camera. So if we go over to the scene window and then we come up here and we press game, we can look out through that camera. Let's go back to scene. If you hit the VRC world, you'll see that that is also another object that is in your scene. So selecting things in your hierarchy will correspond with the stuff that is actually in your game or in your scene window. Let's select the light here. You can't see the object in the scene, and that is because we have gizmos off we can turn. So this is going to turn off just things that the player, like non-physical objects in your scene, if that makes sense. So if you go to the top right of your scene window, hit this little toggle here and turn that on, we can now see all the things. We can see icons representing some of the stuff that's in your scene that the player typically doesn't see. So like there's this light here, but the player doesn't actually see a physical object. This is just like simulating directional light, which is like sunlight. So if we have the directional light selected, we come over here into the right side, we can see something that's called the inspector. The inspector is going to have, basically these are like game scripts or coding scripts that are going to give you attributes of the objects you have selected. So we have the light selected. We can see it has a light component and it's got the type directional light. And then there's a whole bunch of other settings in here. So when you have something in your game and you select it, you can come over to the inspector and see all the settings for that object. On the bottom of your window is basically your folders object. This is going to show you everything that you've brought into Unity and things that you can drag into your game. So these are going to be like your this is like your Windows folder. So we've got a a folder, we're looking in the assets folder. We can look in the packages folder. If we go to assets, which is what we're mainly going to be working in, is in the assets folder, we can see scenes. We've got the VRC default scene, which is what we're looking at right now. And then there's a bunch of other stuff. For our project, we are going to create a new folder. So we're going to right click in this project window, go to create, go to folder, and we're going to type something like, I'm just going to do tutorial, entertainment room. And then I'm going to double click that. And this is just, you don't technically have to do this, but this is just going to help you stay organized. I'm going to create another folder, right click, create folder. Let's call it FBX. And then let's create another folder, create folder. We'll do textures. And then finally, let's create folder, and I'm going to call this one scenes. So looking in your scene window right now, we are looking at the going to the hierarchy, we are looking at the VRC default world scene. So scenes are like, you can think of the scene as like your game or your world. Let's go to this folder that I created. We're going to right click, we're going to go to create, we're going to create a new scene. So let's find the scene, create new scene. We are going to rename this. I'm just going to call it tutorial. Actually, I'm going to call it entertainment room. Then we're going to double click that. And now we are looking at a default blank scene. And if you look up here in the hierarchy, it says entertainment room. And then all that comes in here is a directional light and a main camera. And that's all we need for now. What we want to do is drag in our FBX object. So let's go to this FBX folder that we created. And then let's go to where we exported that FBX file. So you can see we've got it here. Let's take that, drag it over into the FBX folder, and it should import pretty simply. We can take this object and drag it into our hierarchy. You can also just drag it into the scene, but I like to drag it into the hierarchy. That's going to put it wherever it is in your Blender view. So 0, 0 is right here. So if we turn on the grid, which you can do in the top by hitting this toggle, we can turn on the X and Y, and we can see that over in the inspector, in the position, it is at 0, 0, and we can see that 0, 0 is kind of in that exact same spot as in Blender. I'm going to turn off the grid because I don't like looking at it. So here's the object that we made in Blender. So let's go back to the folders that we created. Let's go to the textures folder. Now we want to drag in the textures that we made in, we want to drag in the textures that we downloaded. So let's find those textures, and all mine are here, and I'm just going to select all these folders, and I'm going to drag it all in just like I did with the FBX. It's going to import everything. You can see the little loading bar, and then we're going to have folders for each one of these. So let's go to carpet. In this folder, we can see all the textures that we had downloaded and that we had just dragged in. And in here, we need to get these textures onto our object. And the way you do that is through materials. You have to create a material, then assign the texture to the material, then drag the material onto your object. So to do that, let's go to our folder, let's right click, press create, and let's go down and press material. Now we've got a new material in this folder. We're going to call it carpet because this is for the carpet texture. And then if we come over into the inspector, we can see all the settings for this material. It's using a standard shader, which I think is fine. And then we can find the base color texture, select the material, drag the texture over to the albedo, and that's going to change the color of this material. Then we have some other stuff in here. We have height, metallic, roughness, and normal. Now, if we select the material and we come over here, we can see that we have a metallic option, and then we have smoothness. And you can see we don't have like a little texture box for this. That is because this shader that we're using has a certain way that objects needs to be set up. This object just so happen doesn't use a roughness map. So we don't really have a slot for this. We can change the shader to something that might. So I do know for a fact that Autodesk Interactive does have a roughness option and a metallic option. So we could drag this roughness in there. But for this object, we are going to go back to standard, and I'm just going to create or put the smoothness all the way down because I know that this is carpeting, it's a fabric, and I know I don't want it to be shiny at all. So I'm just going to have the smoothness value be 0. But know that if you did want to use these maps, or if you had a texture that has a roughness or a metallic, you can change the shader to something that would work better with it, like Autodesk Interactive. We're going to stay on standard, keep the smoothness all the way to 0, and now let's drag in the normal to the normal spot. And just like in Blender, you need to tell the program that this texture is supposed to be read as a normal map. So that's why we're getting this little option here. We're going to press fix now, and that's exactly what it's going to do. You can also do this by selecting the texture and going over and going into the inspector and changing the texture type to normal map. By default, it is on default, but this is a normal map. We're going to keep it on normal. This material should be complete. We can take it, drag it onto your scene, and because the floor is all one object, it should apply the carpet everywhere it has this material on this object. We've got the floor selected, so we can, now that we've dragged it onto the floor, we have the floor selected, we can go into the inspector, we can kind of just look to see how this is set up. So the default components for a mesh in Unity is going to have components that are like this. So it's going to be identifying what mesh it's using, and then it's got a mesh renderer. So this component basically tells the program that the player can see this mesh, and it's looking for the amount of materials that we had assigned in Blender for it. So we've got 2 materials on here. So if we go to Blender and we select the floor, we can see, and if we select the floor and we go down to the material tab, we can see we've got 2 materials assigned to it. So in Unity, this object has 2 materials it needs to be assigned to it. So we've created the carpet material, and it can find that and can see it, and we've assigned it to it, so that's why we can see the carpet in here now. Now we need to create the wood floor material. So let's go to textures, let's find our wood floor textures that we created. Here they are here. Let's right click, create, let's go down to material. We're going to call this wood floor, and then we are going to just drag the color to the albedo section. And these textures are set up in a way to where it should work with the standard. It should work with the standard shader. So it actually has a metallic smoothness map together, which is this texture here. So we're going to drag that, put it over there. And it's also got a normal, which is this. And we're going to drag that, put it over here. We're going to press fix now to tell the program that that is a normal map, and it should be read as a normal map. And then we can take this material and drag it onto our floor. Now you can see we've got the carpet and the wood textures on there, and they look pretty good, and I'm liking this so far. Let's go ahead, finish out the walls. We're going to do the exact same thing. Go to drywall, right click, create material, call this drywall, and then we're going to take the color, put it here, and then we're going to take the metallic smoothness, put it there, take the normal, put it in the normal slot, and then we're going to press fix now, and then we can take this, drag it onto the walls, and then let's go to textures. We're going to do the exact same thing with the trim. It's misspelled, but that's okay. We're going to right click, create, material, trim, take the color, put it in the color section, take the metallic smoothness, put it in the metallic smoothness. Or alternatively, if you've got roughness and you're using a different shader, you can put the roughness to roughness, metallic to metallic. You get the idea. And then once you've got that completed, put it on the object. Now we've got all of our materials created and everything is colored. But at this point, we can look at this and say, and kind of determine if everything looks good. We can double check our stuff, our mesh that we created. Everything does look good. Looks good to me. Now let's begin to make this functional for the player. By default, when you bring in an FBX, let's go to the FBX. We drag it into the scene, and you can see it's this blue color. What this blue color tells you is that each one of these, everything in Unity in your hierarchy is a game object. So if we can create an empty game object. We've got game objects here, and we'll get to adding stuff in a little bit. Everything's a game object, and a blue colored version of it is like an instance of a single game object. So we could duplicate this, and then we've got 2, but they're both blue, and it's a copy of this version. If we made changes to this version and applied the changes, it would make changes to all the duplicate versions. Knowing that's how prefabs work, you can do a lot with that to save on time with building stuff. And by default, when you bring in an FBX into your scene, it creates one of these prefabs for you. And the reason why that's important is because you can manipulate this and change this prefab in any way that you want. And this isn't very important for the base version of this world, though it can be important when you make a chair and you want to duplicate that chair around. And then if you make changes to the chair at all, you don't want to make it 10 times because you've got it duplicated out 10 times. So that's why it's important. What is important for this is if the FBX stays as a prefab from the import, if we make any changes in Blender and re-export it out into their project, it will update exactly to how we made our changes here. If we go here, we go down to so right click, go down to prefab and press unpack, which we're not going to do. But if we did that and then make changes in here, it may not correspond with how it interacts in the scene. So that's important. That's important maybe. I don't know if we'll make any significant changes where it would be important to know. But it is important to know, so know it. What we are going to do is create a new prefab with this, because I do like to prefab everything that I make out. And I'm going to show you how you do that. So let's go into this folder. We're going to right click, press create. We're going to create a new folder because I like to stay organized. I'm going to call it prefabs, and let's open this up. We are going to right click in the hierarchy. We're going to create a new empty object. So press create object. Right clicking in the hierarchy, you can see you've got a bunch of options here. You can add a whole bunch of stuff. So there's like 3D objects, audios, effects. So this is like your particle systems, things like that. We are just going to start with an empty game object. So there's nothing in here. We're going to call this base walls. That works for me. I'm going to zero out the position. So it's at 0, 0. And then I'm going to take this, and I'm just going to bring it in here. We're going to keep this blue. It's going to stay as the default prefab that it is. Just in case we make any changes in Blender, it will correspond to the changes in our scene. We can take this object, we can drag it down into our folder and bring it in here. And now we have a prefabbed version, a new prefab of the space world. Now let's make some changes to this. There's a couple things we need to do. We need to make this like actually playable for the player. So right now, let's say we had a player spawn in here. What would happen is that they would fall through the world, and then they would fall to their death, and then they would respawn and then fall again, because we've got to tell the program that these objects have collision. There's a really easy way to do this, and that is we can select. Let's select this. Left click, select, pressing shift. Let's select that one as well. We can come all the way into the inspector, press add component. We can add a new component, so basically like a new script to these objects. And I'm going to type in a collider, and there's a whole bunch of colliders in here that we can choose from. The easiest one to add collision to these objects is mesh collider. So if we select that, now there is a collider on each one of these objects, and it's going to follow the mesh of the object. Doing it this way is not recommended for some things. It's not recommended because if you have an object that has too many vertices, a mesh collider will cause performance issues, because it's basically saying every vertice that the player touches on this object needs to interact. And if you have an object that has 1 million vertices and the player touches 400,000 of them at once, your game's going to crash and it's going to lag and you're going to have problems. So for that reason, it's not recommended. Now, these objects don't have enough vertices for that to really be an issue that you have to worry about, but there are better ways to get better collision in your world. One of those ways is you can just manually bring in, right click 3D object, bring in cubes and stuff. Now this can get quite tedious to put cubes everywhere where you need them. One method I like to use, and we're not going to go through this, but just so that you know, one method I like to use is I like to go into Blender. I will manually create my own mesh for collision. So let's say for this floor, maybe I would take these parts, I would duplicate them, make it its own object. They don't need any material, so I would get rid of that, and then maybe I would take this, drag it out, do that for the stairs, and then do the same thing here, drag it out. Now I'm going really quick here, and this is kind of just so that you know. Then I would have this object, and I would take this object, make sure it's in the same spot that I want it, and then I would take that object and I would export that out, bring it into Unity, and then put a mesh collider on that. So that will give collision to the floor, or believable collision to the floor at much lower vertices, or at a much lower poly count than what the floor currently is. That is one way you can go about it. So if you have a much more complex world, I do recommend that you would create collision meshes in Blender and then export them out and bring them into Unity. But for this scene and for the tutorial's sake, we are just gonna keep it with a mesh collider because that's easiest. You can just select it, add a mesh collider to it. Now that this has a mesh collider on it, the player is now able to interact with the walls and the floor. So how do you get a player to spawn into this world? You need to add a prefab that VRChat has created for you, and it is in your package folder somewhere. So we're going to select packages in the bottom left here. We're going to go to the search and we're going to type in VRC, and right as I tried to search, it changed it back to in assets. We're going to make sure that we click packages. We're going to type VRCWorld. This object here is a VRCWorld prefab. So we're going to take that, we're going to drag this in and put it right where we want the player to spawn. And now we've got it here. So this is your spawn point. So if we have this game object selected, we go all the way into the inspector and we look to see what's in here, we can kind of see what's going on. So this is an empty game. Well, it's not an empty game object, but it's a game object that has a bunch of scripts, or also known as components, added to it to help this function as a functioning VRChat world. It's got our scene descriptor, which has a bunch of settings in it. So it's got like the spawn point, which is this game object, the spawn order, just in case you had multiple, and a bunch of other stuff. It's showing the spawn orientation, which by default has the player spawning in the direction of the blue check mark, or the blue arrow, check mark arrow. We can change that by pressing E, which is going to be our hotkey for our rotate tool. And you can see that the tool's right there. So we have this selected, we pressed E. You can also just press the rotate tool. We can grab the yellow to rotate in the Y axis, press Control to lock it, and we're going to rotate it 90 degrees. And now if we press W, which is the hotkey for the arrows, this blue should be pointed in this direction. The reason why it's not is because we have the global transform orientation selected. If we press local, it will show which direction the object is pointed. Global shows the direction of the scene, or like the world. So Y is always up in Unity, X is always out, Z is always in that direction. But if we go to local, now we can see the orientation of the object that we have selected, and Z is now pointed in the direction that we want. And that is the direction that the player is going to spawn in. So and I want the player to spawn in looking in that direction. So we're going to keep that. Going back into the inspector, let's look down in here. We've got the pipeline manager. The pipeline manager is going to tell, when you upload your world, it's going to assign, basically it's like a serial number. It's going to assign to your world. So that ID is going to, when you upload a world to that ID, it's going to always upload to the same ID. So like when I do updates to the black hat, it always has the same ID. So it always like updates the world that everybody's going in. That makes sense. Moving down, we can see we've got some movement stuff. We can change the jump, walk, run, and strafe speeds. That happens in here. So if you want the player to be able to run faster or to walk faster, you can change those settings here. And then down here, we've got the minimum and maximum heights for players to scale their avatars to. That's everything that comes with the VRC world. I'm going to drag this and just going to put it I'm going to put it under the main camera because I like to have it at the top. And now we can test this in Unity. By default, Unity comes with a tool called Client Sim. So if we come up here to the VRChat SDK, go to Utilities, press Client Sim, we can select that. And we can see that it's enabled, and there's a bunch of other settings for it. But what this means when it's enabled is when we press play. So play will let you test your game in Unity. When we press play while we have Client Sim on, it's going to create a simulated version of VRChat in Unity. So let's press play so you can kind of see what that looks like. So it's going to compile all your scripts, and it's going to load the world. And we're going to make sure our scale is proper. And then it's got a little info about the client simulator. We're going to press accept. And now if we move our mouse around, we can kind of maneuver around the same way we would if we were in VRChat. And you can see that we have that mesh collider on these objects. So the collider is colliding with all of these objects, which is exactly what we wanted. And they move around in this scene, and everything looks great and good and awesome. Perfect. So let's press play again, or we can press this exit play mode and we can get out of that. The next thing I want to talk about with this is lighting. Lighting is a big part of creating worlds and a big part of Unity. And it's also a really confusing part. So I want to talk about it a little bit. And I have a tutorial where I go into more detail with lights, which I'll link below. So if you ever get confused or if you want to go more in depth on this topic, I recommend that video. By default, you have this directional light in your scene, and let's get rid of that. I don't want that. So I'm going to select that and I'm going to press the delete key to delete it. And I'm going to right click, I'm going to create a new game object, and I'm going to call this lights. And this is just an empty game object to organize my hierarchy. I'm going to right click on it, and we're going to add something. We're going to go down to light, and we're going to add a point light. And that's going to create, this is kind of like a light bulb. And I don't have anything in, I've got the base mesh in here, but I don't have any like props or anything in here yet. So I've got no objects that are supposed to have light sources coming out of them. So I'm just going to place these in random spots. And let's duplicate this. We can duplicate stuff in here by pressing Control D, and that just duplicated this game object. And I'm going to bring this, I'm going to drag it over here. So now we've got 2-point lights. There's lots of different lights you can add. So let's right click on here. Let's go down to light, and let's look at this directional light. That's what we had in here by default. That's going to simulate like a sun. Point light is like a light bulb. Spotlight is a spotlight, and area light is it's going to project light from this entire shape. So you can like change that. And with each one of these, they've got settings that are kind of unique to it in the hierarchy or in the inspector. You can change the type here. You don't have to add a specific type of light. You can just change what you want this to be. We are going to keep that as point. So let's look at the settings in here. We've got range. This is going to determine how far it goes. With the spotlight, you're going to have the spot angle as well. So you can kind of see how that's interacting in here. Let's go back to point light. We're going to keep it as 10. In the color section, you can change the color. In the mode, you can change it from real time to bake. I think by default, lights come in as real time. Now, the mode is very important, and we're going to get to that in a second. But let's just go down here. Intensity describes how intense the light is. Pretty self-explanatory. Indirect multiplier. Changing this value, you won't see change in real time. The indirect multiplier determines how bright the bounces of the light are. So this is going to be like if the light bounces off the floor or onto a prop, how bright is it on that prop from just the light bounce? So that's what that value is. The shadow type is, I'm going to be honest, I don't really know the difference between hard and soft, but I usually always pick soft, because I like when my lights have shadows. There are some instances where maybe I don't want shadows on a specific object or from a specific light source. So that's what that is used for. There's a bunch of settings here for the shadows. We're going to go past that. Cookie will determine you can put in a texture to determine the shape of the light it projects. We're not going to worry about that. And then there's render mode, culling mask. This will determine what layers it affects. We're not going to worry about that. We're just going to keep it on everything. Let's select this light and let's talk about the mode. So by default, lights come in as real time. And what that means is this light is going to be actively simulating what light does in your scene. Now, if you ever gone into a VRChat world and it was super laggy and it looked kind of weird, that is because they had a ton of real-time lights in the scene constantly shooting off every vertices and simulating what that light's supposed to look like. There are some great uses for real-time light, but in VRChat specifically, I don't think you should use it ever, really, because it just causes lag, and that's basically all it does. So you want to make sure that your lights are baked. What baked lights mean is that means in Unity, it will simulate how that light acts, and it will kind of freeze it in time, create a texture overlay. It's almost like an emissive texture overlay onto your objects, and it's going to pretend like the light is actually there when in reality it's just kind of baked into the scene. What's important to know is by changing this mode to baked does not change your lights to baked yet. You need to actually bake them into the scene, and the way you do that is you go to Window, you go down to Rendering, and then you press Lighting, and you can get this lighting tab here. And then first you need to create a new lighting scene asset. But once you do that, there's a bunch of settings here that we'll get to. You have to press this Generate Lighting to actually bake your lights. So it's very important that all the lights that you bring in are baked, and that you go to this lighting tab and you generate lighting. So we are going to do that right now. So let's go back to assets. Let's close this out. I'm going to choose, let's go to tutorial. I'm going to choose my scenes folder, and I'm going to create a lighting setting asset. I'm going to press new. It's going to create a new lighting setting asset wherever we had selected, whatever folder we had selected. So we're just going to do it there. There's a whole bunch of settings here. We'll get to these settings in a little bit. I'm going to change this to progressive GPU. This is the default light mapper. The light mapper kind of determines how lights are baked in your scene. And then there's a whole bunch of settings here. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But let's just go ahead and bake lights and see what happens. So pressing generate lighting, it's going to take 2 seconds to do, and then everything turns dark. And the reason it turns dark is because our objects are not static. Lights will only bake onto objects that are static, basically objects that we've told the program these objects are not going to move. So because we've told the program that these objects are not going to move, it's going to bake lights on there. So let's select our prefab that we had created that has our base walls and floor in it. Let's go over to the inspector, and we're going to press the static button. This is going to tell the program that these objects aren't ever going to move. And because of that, if we hit this drop down, you can see that there are a bunch of options here. One of them is contribute GI, that's referring to lighting. That means that we want lights to bake on here. So if you want lights to bake on your objects, turn them to static. Let's go back to the lighting tab, and let's go down to generate lighting, and let's try this again. After we press generate lighting, you can go down to the bottom and you can see this global illumination, that's GI. Global illumination is loading, and it's trying to bake lights onto our scene. So let's look. So that's completed. We can see we've got some information here. In this folder, our scenes folder, we can go to, it generated a new folder for us called, basically just calls it the scene room. These are our light maps. So these are textures that overlay your scene to simulate the lighting. Now, if we grab this point light and move it around, nothing happens because now the light is baked in your scene. And it only baked the lights that we had assigned bake. Now, if you look at this, you can kind of see that it looks very weird. It's got these dark lines, and it just looks bad. And the reason it looks bad is because we did not UV unwrap this project to work with light maps. So going back into Blender, just like we created seams and we unwrapped this to work with the textures we had, just like we did that there, we need to do the same thing for our light maps. We need these textures to be able to go on here because we didn't do that. It's got no UVs to work with our light maps. There's a way to do this in Blender and a way to do this in Unity, and I'm going to show you Unity real quick. So let's find the FBX object that we imported. Let's select that, and if we select the FBX object in the folder and go into the inspector, we can go all the way down here. There's this option here called Generate Light Map UVs. This basically just says, like, you're just saying, hey Unity, can you make the light map UVs for me? And this way is typically fine. You can do it this way, but you give up a lot of control. And for more complex objects, you may want that control. So we're just going to press that. Let's press apply, and let's see what happens after we bake. So what is this doing? We're going to ignore that. It thinks the roughness is a normal notch for some reason. We're going to ignore that. So we've applied the Generate Light Map UVs. We can go back to the Lighting tab, and we can press Generate Lighting again. Wait for that to load, and let's see what happens. So that's done loading now. It looks a lot better. There's like proper shadows in this area. The light is hitting in the right spots. This did a pretty good job. Yeah, it did a pretty good job. There's not a lot going on with these objects and these meshes. So it did do a good job, and I do like this, and this is good enough for me, in my opinion, but I do want to show you how you would do it manually in Blender. So let's go back to Blender, and let's start with the floor object, and let me turn on my screencast so that you can see it. And now you can see everything that I'm doing right there. So we've got the floor selected. Let's go to the object data properties, and we're going to select this UV map. So if we press tab and go into edit mode, if we change any of this, we are going to affect our textures, and we don't want to do that. But we can add a new UV map to this by going to the right here, pressing this plus button, and now we've got a new one here called UV map 0.001. By default, Unity will use whatever your second UV map is as your light map. If you want to manually unwrap your project for light maps, you can do that by creating a second UV light map. Now that we've done that, we can press A to select everything, U, and this is already, this should already have seams from before, so we can just go ahead and press unwrap, and we can take this and we can try to fill up this space as much as we can. We don't need to overlay this on any textures. I'm just going to move this around to give it some space, and I think this is good enough to work as our light map, so that's great. So let's go to the walls, and we're going to do the same thing. Let's press this little plus button for the UV maps. Now we've got a second UV map. We're going to press tab, we're going to press A to select everything, we're going to press U, and then we're going to unwrap, and it's going to unwrap everything. And then we can, you know, this doesn't have to be perfect, but I like to try to fill this up as much as possible to give Unity as much space to do light maps. And we can select all of this, scale this up. Let's scale this up a bit. Actually, let's select, I've got face select here. I'm going to select only these faces so I can scale everything up here to give it a bit more room to do stuff. Pressing L, I can select each one of these, drag them out, and I'm just moving this around the UV map in hopes that it's going to give us some more detail with our light maps. There's a few more here. Let's scale this down. Let's try to get it to fit. And I think this is good enough for the light maps for the walls. Now we've got 2 UV maps on each of these objects. The second UV maps are our light maps. Now let's select the floor holding shift. Let's select the floor holding shift, select the wall. So now we've got the walls and the floor selected. If we look up here, now let's export this back out to our Unity scene. So we're going to do File, Export, just like we did before, FBX. Instead of exporting here, I'm actually going to go to Unity, Tutorial, Assets. I'm going to find it in our project, Tutorial Entertainment Room. So that's that folder we created. FBX, that's the folder we created. So this is actually in the project. And I'm going to overwrite this file. Let's press Export FBX. Let's go back to Unity. It re-imported. It's still giving me that warning about the roughness. I don't know why. We're going to press Ignore. And now nothing noticeable changed. And that is because we had generated light map UVs in Unity. If we select this FBX, just like we had turned it on, we need to turn this off now because we created our own UV maps or light map UVs. Press Apply, and it's going to make everything look crazy because now it's using different UVs. So we need to bake lights again. Let's go to Lighting and press Generate Lighting. Let this load. And now that that's done, we can look at our results. It looks pretty much the same as the other ones. Like I said, these meshes aren't that complex, so giving that power to Unity to create its own light map UVs was not a bad option. And if you like that more, you can go ahead and use the generated ones in Unity, or if you like what you did here, you can use the ones that you created. The power that comes from creating your own is that if you have issues, you can kind of look at your UV unwrap and you can kind of decide what you want to do and how you want to fix certain things. And that just gives you a bit more power to fix things in here. But for now, this is good enough. And that was a lot of info on lights. And we still have so much more to talk about when it comes to lights. But before we do that, I want to get some props in here and actually start building this out and actually making this look like a fully filled out functioning world. To do that, we need props, and there's lots of ways we can go about getting props. One thing that we can do is we can go into Blender and we can model something out and we can create something like this. And then we can take this weird object, we can color it, we can then do everything that we did with the base and export it out and bring it into Unity and then use that object in Unity as a prop and all this stuff. But we're not going to do any of that because all that process that I just talked about is everything we just learned with creating the base. We just kind of did it on a larger object. We are going to bring in an asset pack that's going to help us fill in this space. There's lots of places you can go to find assets or props for your world. So one place that's like VRChat specific is Booth. There's a bunch of stuff on this website that has stuff for VRChat. I've got a bunch of stuff on here. This is my shop. It's got assets you can put in. So this is a bar asset pack that's pretty popular. There's a bunch of stuff on this whole website. Another place is the Unity Assets Store. This has also a bunch of stuff So you just go through it. So if we type in, I don't know, let's just type in TV, see what comes up. So there's a whole bunch of stuff here. You can organize it for like free. You can see what's for free on here. Tons of stuff. You can drag the stuff in. Another place is Sketchfab. This is my Sketchfab account, so there's a bunch of stuff on here you can drag into your scene. So there's places you can go. For us in this tutorial right now is I actually created an asset pack that we can use. This asset pack uses stuff from some of my recent projects. If you want this pack, it is in the description for free. You can download it. I created it I put it together, just these assets specifically for this tutorial. Typically when you download something from like Booth or the Unity Asset Store, I think from the Unity Asset Store, you'll just import it directly from Unity. But everything from Booth, you'll usually get a Unity package, and you can import this by just double-clicking it or taking it and dragging it into the folders here. So that's what we're going to do. So if you download this pack from the description, you'll get everything that I included in here. It's got a whole bunch of stuff. It doesn't have a whole bunch. It's got some stuff. It has enough stuff for what we're going to do. Once it's done importing into your scene, you'll have to go back to your assets folder and try to find where it went. And I think I named that folder entertainment room, which is a bit confusing because the folder we're working in is tutorial entertainment room, but the package with a bunch of props is called entertainment room. Usually when you import a package, there will be a folder in there called prefabs, and this will have the completed version of all the meshes that you imported. My pack that I just gave you comes with all of this, which is just some random props from the last few projects that I've made. If we look into the folders, you'll see that there's an FBX, so this just has like the plain FBX objects, and then there's textures, and there's also like some animations in here as well. But if we go to prefabs, the prefabs are going to be these objects, all like they're going to have the proper materials added to them, they're going to have any animations that come with them, they're going to have everything. So this is the folder we want to go into. So let's just start adding stuff in here. I want to be organized, so I'm going to go into the hierarchy. I'm going to right click, I'm going to press create empty, and we're going to call this meshes. And I'm actually going to take this base walls and I'm going to bring it into meshes because that included in there. And let's just start grabbing and dragging things in. So let's start with this sectional couch, and things are going to be dark because the lights are baked and they're not actually affecting these objects yet. We'll have to rebake them to make sure that they work, and we'll talk more about lighting when we get there. But for now, let's just add some objects. If you're having difficulty seeing in your project because lights are baked and it's going to look a bit wonky to begin with, you can go to the top here and hit this little light bulb. It's going to basically, this will just turn off the lights in your scene. So it can make it a bit easier to work with. So I think we will work in this view to begin with. So we've got a couch in here now, maybe this chair. My idea is that there's going to be a couch here and there's going to be like a TV over here or something. And because we added a mesh collider to these objects, when we drag them in, it's going to collide with those colliders. So this is kind of how you want to add this stuff in here is kind of up to you. I'm going to move this sectional couch up here. You can see these green cubes around here. That's the collider on the object. Select this object and go into the inspector. You can see that instead of a mesh collider on this, we have a box collider. So you just add that by pressing add component and find the collider that you want. After we're searching for collider right now. So you can just find the collider that you want and add it to the object. And for these sectional pieces, I've got just a simple box collider on there. So if you download that asset pack, you'll see everything that I'm looking at in here. So I guess I'm just gonna go through this really quickly and just add what I want to add, and we're gonna time lapse this so you don't have to sit through me building this out. I just finished decorating the space, so this is kind of what I chose to set it all up like. One thing I do want to mention that I didn't mention when talking about movement is this pivot and global options. So when you bring in an object and you look where your arrows are, I think by default it's on the pivot. You can change that to center, where it will choose the center of the object. Sometimes that's easier to work with than the pivot. The pivot will correspond wherever your origin point is for the object. So for the walls, the pivot should be right where this yellow or this orange dot is in Unity. So if we select the walls only, we have our pivot selected, and it is right where that orange dot would be. So for this object, the pivot point is right here. If it's easier for you, you can work with center. And then we talked about global and local when we were messing with the spawn point. Global will be the world direction, but local will correspond with the object's direction. Let's just put that back on global. I'm going to delete that object because I don't want it. But this is how I've decided to decorate the space with the props that I've included. If you're familiar with my worlds, you'll probably recognize some of these assets. Like I think this is from the McMansion, and I think I had this in the McMansion. Let's keep things organized. Let's select all of the meshes, put them under meshes in the hierarchy, keeping that all nice and organized. And now we can go ahead and focus on lighting again. Now we could go to the lighting tab and generate, but these lights are now kind of out of place. Now in the pack, I didn't include any ceiling light sources, so I tried to fill the space up with lots of lamps and lights. We are going to try to use those as the points where we want point lights to be. So I'm going to delete one of these, and now I've only got this one point light. Let's go to the inspector. I'm going to change it a little bit. So let's drag it over, and we're going to try to put it inside this lamp. And now the icon for this light is a little big. So instead of toggling it off like we did at the beginning, we can go here, press this drop down, and we can change the size of the icons. So I'm going to just change that to something that's a bit nicer. We're going to drag this down, try to place it right in the middle here. Now all of these props should have came in properly, so they should be like set to static. They should have light map UVs. They should be ready to go. So let's select this light. We're going to try to change the color to match the color temperature of this lamp, which is just going to be a bit warmer, and maybe something like this. We'll see how that bakes. The range 10 is probably a bit too big. Let's start with 5 and see where that gets us. And then we have the shadow type as soft shadows, and I think for all of these light sources, we are going to be using point lights. So I don't have, if I had a ceiling light, I could, let's duplicate this out. So as I duplicate it, you can see because this first light was baked, it wasn't changing the lights at all in the scene. But because I duplicated it, it generated a new light and it brought it in as real time. And while it's still copying the settings as the other one, we need to bake this again for this light to actually be baked. So we're going to take this duplicated light just for demonstration purposes. Let's change it to the spotlight, and let's make sure it's pointed down by pressing E and rotating. We're going to press W. Let's drag this up, and we can change this setting. So if I had a ceiling light, I could do something like this. Let's make sure that it doesn't clip with the ceiling. Let's make sure it's actually in the room. We could do that, and we get to change the settings to be however you want it to be. But I don't have any ceiling lights, so I don't need this. We're going to delete this spotlight. Let's take the point light that we had. Let's press Control D to duplicate, and let's move this to the other lamps. And then because the light sources for these lamps are all the same, I'm just going to duplicate the point light to make sure that they're all the same throughout all of them. Let's try to place it to the best of our ability. Let's press Control D, duplicate it again. Let's drag it all the way down over here. Try to place it to the best of our ability. We're going to press Control D again, and now this light is a bit bigger, so maybe we change the range to 6 or something like that. And let's try to place it in the center here to the best of our ability. I think that looks good, so we'll bake this to see what... Yeah, well, let's go ahead and bake this and just see what happens. So let's go to lighting, press generate lighting. Typically when you're baking, so this is going to take a little bit longer than before because now we've got more stuff in here. Let's run, we'll see what happens. All right, that's completed, and it's quite moody, quite dark. I do think I want something a bit brighter, and there's lots of ways we can go about doing that. The first way is we could select all these point lights and manually update them, but before we do that, let's look at the settings here. We can change some things in here to maybe get a better of a bake. Two of the settings that I mess with quite a bit is the light map resolution and the light map size. So this is like the amount of detail in each light map, and then this is how large that file size can get. I usually like to bake at the highest level, so 4K, and I usually bring the resolution down to like 20. You kind of want to adjust these settings so that it works with the specs of your PC, because having a really large light bake settings can be pretty intensive for people who don't have like proper GPUs or anything like that. This usually works for me, and I usually bake much larger projects than this, so I think that will be fine. Another setting, because this is a bit darker than I think I would like, I'm going to boost the indirect intensity. So this is that same setting. So if we go to the inspector, it's the insane setting for the multiplier. It's just kind of for the whole map. The indirect intensity, we're going to increase to maybe like 1.3 or something, just a little bit, not a lot. Another thing that can change how the world looks is the environment lighting settings. So there's some settings in here that are pretty important, like the environment lighting. This is going to use whatever your skybox. So right now we just have the default Unity skybox because we haven't created a skybox for this level. It's going to use the information from the skybox to determine your ambient lighting. I usually would like to do gradient, and that gives me a bunch of color options here. This is going to determine kind of this color, like the shadow color and how bright that gets. So we're just going to do the default gradient settings in the environment reflections by default. So you could see reflections in here and it looks kind of weird. And that's because it's taking the skybox and it's kind of using that as the information for reflections, which we don't really want because it makes things look weird like this. So we haven't talked about reflections yet, but usually Skybox isn't a bad option here, but we can make that custom. But we need our own cube maps to place here. Now we don't have any reflections in the scene, not any manual reflections in the scene, because we haven't added any. So let's go ahead and add a reflection. Let's go to lights. Let's right click, go down to light, add a reflection probe. And you're going to get something that looks like this. So this is a reflection probe, and you want to put this in the scene where, for rooms, I try to put it in the center of the room, and this will determine what the reflections look like on the objects around this object. For this probe, anything that is in this cube, and I'm pressing this button here to adjust the probe zone, anything that's in this zone is going to be affected by this probe. And you see wherever this, if I hit this button here, we can move the circle around. Wherever this circle is, this is going to act like a 360 camera, and it's going to take a picture of your scene, and it's going to use that image it takes as the reflection image for your object. So that's kind of how this works. So let's adjust this zone to fit the room. We're going to make sure that this circle is in the middle of this room, which I think it pretty much already is. So let's kind of move it there. Now you don't see anything there yet because we need to bake the scene again for that to happen. So we'll bake in a moment. Something else that you need to add to your scene for lights is something called a light probe. So let's right click, go to light, and add a light probe. So as we talked about, lights will bake onto all the non-moving objects. So all the objects that you labeled as static, lights will bake onto those objects, but in your scene, you still want to light non-static objects. And the way you do that is you use light probe groups. So a non-static object would be objects like a pickup object or the player walking through the scene. These are all objects that aren't static. What a light probe does is after you bake lights, it will take the information that is at each one of these points and project it onto the moving object. So when your player walks through, whatever light information is at this yellow dot, as they get closer to this yellow dot, it will take the information and put it onto the player there. So if we go into so we have the light probe group added to the scene. We've got it selected. Let's press edit light probe group, and we want to take these dots and kind of add them everywhere. So when we have a light probe group, or we have a dot over here, it's going to say, oh, when the player is over here, it should be dark. And if we press Control D and duplicate it and then use the arrow keys to move it around, If we add one by this lamp, when the player is close to this lamp, it's going to say, oh, the player needs to be brighter here, or whatever the non-static object is. So we're going to take this and we're just going to add a whole bunch of these, and we can use these little, I don't know what to call it, but projection modes to, that's what I'm calling it, projection mode. We can use this up here in the top right to rotate around the scene and kind of have a better view at this. And I press this little cube in the center to give me the orthographic view of this. I'm pressing edit light probe position. Then I can kind of drag over these light probes. I can press Control D to duplicate, and I can move these all around the scene. Let's do a top-down view, and I'm just going to put them everywhere. I don't need these. I'm going to press delete, and I'm going to delete these as well. Delete that. Let's delete that. Okay, let's grab this, Control D, move this over here, Control D to duplicate. Let's grab both of these, Control D to duplicate again, Control D to duplicate, select all of these, Control D. We're just gonna keep pressing Control D and duplicate this all over the place. Control D, Control D, Control D, Control D, and let's kind of bring some up a little bit higher. And now, going out of the orthographic view, we are just gonna maybe duplicate one of these and kind of put them in some hot spots. So like where there are bright lights at, when the player gets really close to them, I want it to be quite noticeable that they are brighter. So we are just going to put a couple over here. And the probes that are being intersected by meshes, let's go ahead and delete, because inside the mesh it's going to be pitch black, and while the player is like on the couch, if there's a probe in the couch, it's gonna make the game is gonna think that the player is in pitch dark. It's gonna think it's like super dark around it, which it is not. So I think this looks good. Pretty simple probe setup. And with this, let's maybe adjust the point lights just a little bit. I think all the point lights are the same except for the one over here. So if I just select the first 4, they're all range 5, which maybe that's fun. Let's just bake again. Let's see what happens. So let's go to lighting, generate lighting with all the changes that we made. It's a little brighter. It's more or less kind of the same. Let's select our reflection probe. We can see this is the probe it's using. If we go to the environment reflections in the lighting settings and hit this button here, we get this option where we can choose a texture to use. If I type in reflection probe, we can see the reflection probe that we just baked, and I can select that. And now for the entire reflections in the map, so basically anything that's not hitting this probe, which everything is, so it doesn't really matter for this case, but in a larger map it would make more of a difference. Everything outside of this will be using this reflection probe. Everything is a little bit darker. I think I want the shadows to be a bit darker. So we're just going to adjust the environment lighting just a little bit. And with that, we can press generate lighting again and see what happens. I don't see a noticeable difference, so we're going to adjust things a bit more. Bring down the indirect intensity. I think I enjoyed the moodiness of the other stuff, or the first bake, a bit more. So let's go through the environment color again. Maybe we change this to just one color and make it pretty dark. And then bake this again, see what happens. So this whole process of light baking is just playing with the settings and seeing what works for you for your map. For every different map, everything is going to look a bit different. So let's bake lights. There are more settings that we can do even outside of the lighting settings and on the mesh side to adjust some stuff. And that bake is finished and things are a little bit darker, so it's a little bit better. But maybe we can do a little bit more. You can see that we're having some light bleeding here, and we can fix that. We might have to go back into Blender. So let's go into Blender. Let's just see where this is on the light map. So I'm in Blender. We're trying to fix this bleeding here. So let's just look. This and this are a bit close to this wall. So maybe some of the light that's coming from this wall is bleeding over. So we can take this, we can scale this in the UV, and maybe that will help. We can possibly adjust this as well. Let's move this out of the way. Bring this all the way over here. Let's bring that over there, and then separate this wall out. And if we select the walls and the floor, file, export, find that FBX object, overwrite it, mess some things up, ignore that warning, press generate lighting again to fix what we just did. And I think that's much better. We got rid of that bleeding. We got rid of that bleeding just by changing the light map UVs and adjusting where it is on the UV map. All right, this is pretty. I think I still even now want it to be a bit darker. So let's take those shadows down even a little bit more. Generate lighting. I don't notice anything. That's fine. We'll just work with this. Let's press play and let's check out this project in the simulator. Player spawns in. The door is blocking us now. We can walk around, jump on here, and things look pretty good. We're gonna move forward with this. Well, actually, no, we're not. We're gonna go out of here. We're gonna adjust this just a little bit, just so I can get some more features in Unity, or to teach you a little bit more about light baking. So one thing that we could do to help with our light bakes is, if we don't like kind of what the resolution is on some of these objects, in the light settings, we can adjust this by changing the light map resolution. We're already at the max light map size, so the only way to do it would be to increase the resolution. Or you can go to the meshes, select the FBX object, and then you can go into the mesh renderer and scale in the light map. So with this object, I can see there's some like weird stuff going on right here. We can maybe get some more detail in here by scaling this up by 2. And what this is going to do is, if we go to, let's find our scene. So these are the light maps that were generated in Unity. If we were to select this FBX object and instead of scaling light map by 1 and do it by 2, it's going to increase how much space it takes up on the light map. So of that 4K texture that we generated, it's going to increase it on there. So that could give that will give us a better bake. So with this one, let's do 3 here. Why not? You typically don't want to go crazy with this because it will increase your bake time. So you just kind of, it's another one of those values that you just kind of want to play with. Let's take this lamp, let's increase it to scale and light map 2. And then if we select the game object that is the prefab, we can go over into the inspector and press apply all. And that's going to change the value that we changed on all the prefab versions of this. So all the objects that we duplicated. I think that might be the seam there for this object, so maybe we rotate this, and when we bake, we won't see the seam of the light there. Let's work with this, and whatever this gives us, we're going to work with, and I think it will be a little bit better, but maybe not too much better. Press generate lighting. It might take a little. This one for me seems to be pretty quick. Everything is updated. Do things look a little bit better? I think they do. We could probably even take it a bit further, but we're not gonna. We're gonna go with that and move forward. You can see you get some artifacts here. You can adjust that as well. If we select these, if we select both of these light maps, go to the inspector, we can compress this in a way to where, or we can compress, okay. Compression is a whole nother thing that we need to talk about, but I guess now's the time to do it. So when you bring in a texture, and let's select this wall under the base walls, when you bring in a texture, it takes up a certain amount of file size in your world. So if you select this, if you select the texture in your folder, go to into the inspector and look at the default settings. These are your texture size, and if you come all the way down here, sometimes this is hidden. Yeah, sometimes it's hidden like this. You just kind of drag it up like that. You can see how much space it's taking up. You can change this by changing the max size or using crunch compression. And by doing this, you can change how much space it ends up taking up. We're going to put that back to 2K because I think it was fine for this tutorial. But that's how you compress in here. And you can compress between PC and Android separately. So if you want it to be one size on PC and another size on Android, you can do that. For light maps, let's find our light maps again. Discard. We're going to select both of these. And if you're a light map, so in this project, if we hit lighting, we can see how much our light maps are taking up. And they're not taking up that much space. 2.7 megabytes is not that bad for light maps. To give you some context, when I bake the black hat, those light maps I think are around 60 megabytes. But what I do is I select them and I compress them. So I select the light map PV or the light map textures. I go to in here, and then instead of doing 4K, I'll do like 2K. For this, it's fine. To get a higher quality texture and get rid of some of these artifacts here, like this weird grain, you can change the format to something like this, press apply, and that gives you a bit of a better bake, but it also increased your light map size to 10 megabytes instead of 2.7. With everything, you just kind of need to find the balance for your world and your project and the thing that you're doing. Light baking, it's tons of fun, lots of information, but let's do something else now. Let's add a pickup object, because you might want a pickup object in your world. I'm going to right click in the hierarchy. I'm going to create an empty. I'm going to call this pickups, and then we are going to go to prefabs and see what objects I have. Oh, actually, I've got some objects in here that can be pickup. These are static objects, maybe. Oh, they're not. Or they are, but they're not baked. They are baked. They just look weird. That's fine. I want these remote controls to both be pickup objects. They're not going to do anything, but the player will be able to pick them up. So I'm going to select both of these, and so let's select that, and then let's hold shift, left click, select that, and let's drag this and bring them over to this new game object that I just made called pickup. Pickup objects are a little bit different than static objects, and they're different because they aren't static objects. So because I want the player to be able to move this, I need to select both of these, and I'm selecting the game object prefabs for both of these, and I need to go over to the inspector and click this static because I don't want them to be static. If you add the pickup stuff to an object that is static, the player will not be able to pick them up. So these are no longer static after you baked. If it baked shadows onto stuff, which these objects are kind of small, so maybe it just missed it or something. Or maybe I have don't project. It does have cast shadow. I don't know why that did that. Doesn't matter. If it casted a shadow onto your object, you may want to bake again. But I want to make these objects into pickups. They are not static anymore. So I'm going to select the mesh part of this object, and I'm going to left click or control and then left click and select that one, and we can edit both of these at the same time. So let's add a component, and we're going to need to add some scripts to this, and VRChat supplies all the scripts that you're going to need, or all the components that you're going to need, so you don't really have to worry about bringing anything bespoke in or anything. First thing you need is a box collider, a collider of some kind to tell the game that the player can interact with this object, or with these objects. So a box collider will do that. And then you want to add a VRC Pickup component. Now this is going to have everything in there that will tell the game that the player can grab these objects and pick them up. And if you look, there's a bunch of settings in here. So use gravity. If you uncheck this and use like is kinematic, this means the player will be able to pick it up. And when they let go, it will stay where it is. I want this to use gravity, so we're going to make sure that that's selected. And then the last thing we want is an object synced, VRC object synced. What this component does is it tells the game that this object needs to sync between all the players. If you don't have this on, that means a player will pick up this remote and no other players in the scene will be able to see them picking up the remote. So if you want things to sync between players, make sure you add this VRC object synced. And that's how you make pickup objects. It's very simple. We can test this by pressing play, and since we have the client simulator on, we can simulate this in Unity using WASD. Walking around, we can find this. Oh, that didn't work. So something's happening, which is why client sim is very cool. And it didn't work because these are still static. I clearly screwed up on turning these into non-static objects. So let's select this. This is the mesh for the stereo remote. Let's hold control, select this as well, and turn that off. And let's press play and see if that fixed it. Walking back here, and now, finally, we've done it correctly. We can pick this up, and we can pick this up. So we fixed the problem. Problem solved. Pickup objects added. The next thing we're going to add is post-processing. So post-processing is going to help you change the colors in the scene. Now, it's important to know that this only works on PC. If you're making a quest world, this won't work. We'll get to uploading quest at the end. But if you do want post-processing, let's go forward with that. To do post-processing in your world, you need to make sure that you have it installed in Unity. To install it, you can go to Window, Package Manager, and this is going to have all your packages. And I think you can, it's been a while since I've had to install post-processing because I have it. I think by default, I think you can go to Unity registry and search for it. Let's see if that works. Post-processing. Yeah, there it is. And then there'll be like a download button or something. It's possible that this is now included in Unity, but if you don't have it, make sure you install it. Let's go ahead and add it to the scene. So we're going to right click, create an empty game object. We're going to call this post-processing. So post-processing is, think of it, the player in your game or in VRChat, the player is a camera. Post-processing is putting like a filter over the camera and changing how it looks. That's the best way you can probably think of it, is that as a filter over the camera. VRChat will it kind of uses its own camera, like it's got its own settings, but you can set up a reference camera, which you'll need to do for post-processing. And you can say, hey, VRChat, use the information from this camera in the game or in the scene that I have as a reference to how it should look in VRChat. And the way you do that is you have a camera, which we do by default. But if you didn't, you can right click and go to camera and add a new one. By default, we have a camera, so let's click our VRCWorld game object. Go in the right, you'll see in the inspector, in the reference camera, they'll have nothing there, so that's default. Let's go over into the hierarchy, take our main camera and drag it over. Now we can change settings in here, and we'll see those settings changed in VRChat. I don't think field of view does anything for the VRChat reference camera, but clipping planes does. So this is kind of separate from post-processing, but you can change this to like 0.01 or something, and this will make it so, when you take your finger in VR and point it at your face and it starts to disappear as it gets closer to your eyes, this will make the difference between where it disappears and where your viewpoint is closer. So by default, it's like 0.3. This is more noticeable if you're in a smaller avatar, but if you're in a larger one, you probably didn't notice this at all. But you can bring down that threshold to 0.01, which I think helps a lot of players who are small. But for post-processing, we need to add a component here called post-processing layer. So now this is us beginning to add post-processing to the camera. We need to assign a layer that will be affected by the post-processing. By default, I typically use water because that interacts with the player. We're not going to talk about what layers are. Just know that every object is on a layer and you can kind of change what interacts with what, if that makes sense. But I don't want to go too deep into layers. Just know water is a good one to choose, and you need this component on the camera that is a reference on the VRChatWorld game object. You need this. Now let's go to that game object that we made. We're going to press add component, and instead of adding a post-processing layer, we are going to add a post-processing volume. The first thing we need to change is the layer that this post-processing game object is on. In the camera, we determined that we were going to use the water layer, so let's select that post-processing game object, change the layer to water, and now we can create a new profile to start to make changes in the scene. So let's press new. It's going to create I think it creates it with the scene. So if we go to scenes, we can see it just created this game object or this file in our folder. Let's go to post-processing. Let's press add effect. You can add there's a whole bunch of stuff here. Let's press bloom, and I just check everything on, and then I can do this, and it's not working. And it's not working because we have not made it a global post-processing volume. So let's check this on. And once we did that, we can see the bloom in full effect here. It is quite loud. You can play with the settings. I wouldn't go above 1 because these objects aren't like full emissive objects. But even at 1, you can kind of see what it's doing. I usually even go a little bit lower than that. I'm going to do like 0.4. 0.4 is good enough for me. So let's add another effect. The other one that's pretty popular people use is the color grading effect. Bloom, you'll see it everywhere. Color grading, you'll also see it everywhere. And if you want to play with these settings even more, go crazy, but this is all we're going to add. So I'm just going to change the mode to neutral. If we do like aces, you can see how much it changes stuff. or you can do custom, and then you can like play with all the settings here. What if I did that? How does that look? Did I do anything? I didn't really do anything. Maybe if we increase the saturation a little bit, let's do like 15. That looks a bit weird. I said that looks a bit weird, but I turned everything off and nothing happened. Maybe if we increase this a little bit, maybe bring in the contrast and the saturation a little bit up. It kind of looked green to me. Am I just seeing stuff? What if I check on green and then I go in the opposite direction? Let's change the temperature. Maybe we can white balance this a little bit better. Well, I definitely white balanced it a little bit better, but I did like the warm tones. Maybe I should go back. Usually when I do like color grading stuff, I feel like I'm really bad with colors. I can't really see what's going on. I don't really get it. So my stuff is always super subtle. And when I do anything big, people are like, "Oh, I like it better without it." And I'm like, "Yeah, fair." That's post-processing. Go crazy with it. I'm just going to leave it like that. And let's do something else. Let's add a video player. I believe the most popular video player is Pro TV, which was created by another VRChat user named TechAnon, and they've got they've got links on their stuff, but I will share the link to this. This is the link that they share for people trying to get started with Pro TV. You can go here and find the download link for it. So this link is in the description. We are going to go and press click to add to the creator companion. And when you do that, it's going to ask you to open up the creator companion, and then it will open up the creator companion, and just follow the instructions, get it through the creator companion. And once you do that, you should see these options in your project. So if we go to projects and you go to manage project, because if you follow the instructions here and you've added Pro TV to the creator companion, you should see all the Pro TV stuff in here. And usually when I'm gonna do or add Pro TV to the project, I just add every single one of these. I'm just gonna select the most recent version of each one of the Architect Pro TV packages. And once I do that, we'll click on Unity and it will import all these assets. I believe that was the last one. So looking here, I've got all the Architect stuff in the project now. So once I click on Unity, it's going to import all these assets, all these packages I just selected. So let's click on this, and this is going to take a second. So just let it load, let it import everything, and then we'll go ahead and add it to the scene. Once Pro TV is imported, you can find all of the Pro TV folders in packages, and they're all labeled by architect.pro TV. There's a whole bunch in here for each package. You'll want to go to this one, Architect Pro TV or .pro TV, and then if you go to samples and then go to prefabs and then go to TVs, there's going to be some prefabs in here, and there's a whole ton of stuff in here, and there's a bunch of prefabs throughout the entire package. I'm not the best resource when it comes to Pro TV, so if you're having issues with it or want to know more about it outside the extent of this tutorial, I recommend going to the link that I shared in the description and then finding some help through there. I'm sure you can contact the creator from that link somewhere. Surely. But for this, let's typically I just drag in something that will work. You're going to get prompted to import some more assets. This asset is for TextMesh Pro. TextMesh Pro is the text and UI features through that this package uses for their UIs. So you're going to want to import this, and TextMesh Pro is a superior text feature in Unity than the default Unity stuff. I would recommend that you have this regardless. So follow the instructions and import that. Once that's done loading, we can look at this package, kind of see what we brought, or we can look at this prefab, see what we brought in. This is just like, I'm sure you've seen this in World. This is just one of the standard prefabs. I'm not going to use this. I want to use the stuff that I brought in, and we can do that. Cancel. We can do that by editing some of the stuff that comes in here. So if we go to the prefab in the hierarchy, we can kind of go through and see what's all in here. The model game object is going to include all the 3D objects for this prefab. I don't want any of that, so I'm just going to disable it. But everything else I do want. I want the UI, the controls here, and all the speakers. So I'm just going to put this somewhere where I think it makes sense. And then now I need to figure out, how do I get the video onto this TV? So this TV is set up so that you should be able to add a video to it. It's got two materials. So one of the materials is like the TV color and everything else that comes with that. And the second material is the screen by itself. We need to, if we go back to the models for Pro TV, and we turn that on, we need to figure out what material is the screen on this object. So let's go and select the TV screen. And then if we come over here into the inspector, we can see that the material applied to this TV screen is Pro TV home theater material. Now, I know that it's in packages somewhere. I just need to find it. So we can do that by just typing Pro TV home theater, exactly how it's written here. And we can find that the material is right there. I don't want these models in the scene, so I'm just going to disable them. Then I'm going to take this and I'm going to drag it onto the TV in my project. And there we go. We should have a working video player. If you go to the creator companion, I think this package will let me play it in Unity. I could be wrong, so we're gonna play the scene. We're gonna test it. We'll see if it works. If it doesn't, we'll just have to wait until I get into VRChat to test it. Close menu. Let's walk in. And now I need a video. I went to YouTube and I pulled a video from my YouTube channel, so I'm just gonna plug that in. Press enter. Let's see what happens. And it worked, so that's working well. If you notice, there's like this weird color in here. This is just like a watermark for the Pro TV, or not Pro TV. It's the player that's in Unity that Pro TV uses. It's like a watermark for it. That will go away once you upload it to VRChat, so you don't have to worry about that. But video player is working. Cool. This world is, for the most part, is done as far as I can tell. There is one more thing we need to add, and it's arguably the most important thing for a VRChat world, and that is the mirror. We are going to make a high quality and a low quality mirror for this world, and we need something that turns it on and off. So we're going to also create a UI menu to make that happen. VRChat supplies the mirrors as a prefab by default. So if we go to packages, which is where all the VRChat stuff is, and we search in VRC mirror, we'll find the prefab for the mirror in VRChat. So here we've got this. We can drag it into the scene. It's going to drag in that mirror object. We can press W and get those arrow keys and move them in the project. And we can kind of place it where we want. Where do I want this mirror actually? I didn't really create a spot for it, so maybe I could put it on top of the stairs. So I'm thinking in front of the video player, or maybe up in front of the mirror, or in front of the stairs. I think I'll do it up here. I'm gonna go into the hierarchy, right click, create empty. Let's call this mirror. And I can drag this in. I'm gonna press F2. I can also right click and go down to rename. And I can call this HQ mirror. And let's size this mirror up to be as big as I want it. We can press R, and then I can use the little things here to scale it. So I'm going between R and W. R for scale, W for the arrow keys. I think something like this is probably fine. And I think maybe I'll put the UI buttons over there. So this is my HQ mirror. If we go to the right into the inspector, let's scroll down. We need to choose what layers this mirror reflects. And now I've said multiple times throughout this that I'm not going to try to explain layers, but I guess I have to now. So in your game, there are a multitude, there can be as many layers as you want, and VRChat has a specific amount of layers that objects in the scene or objects in the game are on some form of a layer. When you add a new object to the scene, by default, these objects are on the default layer. And if you select an object and you go into the inspector and look at layer, you can see what layer that object is on. If we go back to the mirror, go into the inspector, go back down to the reflect layers, we see that we are reflecting every layer. You can also see that we've got default selected. So that means all the objects you see that are on the default layer, which I think is basically everything in here, will be reflected properly, or will be reflected in this mirror. If I press nothing is reflected, and all you see is the skybox. And if I press just default, you'll see everything again because everything in here is on the default. One of the most important things that you need though And I don't know if it would work in VRChat if you don't have this selected. I actually haven't tried this because there's no point in testing this, but you need the mirror reflection layer checked on. So make sure that's checked on. And for the high quality mirror, I basically want everything to be shown. We need player. So we need player, which is the players, and then you need player local, which is like you. This is like everybody else in the scene, and this is you in the scene. So you want both of those reflected. We also want the default layer reflected, and then any other layer that you might have used throughout this. So we've got some objects on the pickup layer. So when you add the pickup script to an object, it changes the layer to the pickup layer. So if maybe we can see this. Because this object is on the pickup layer and we haven't selected the pickup layer yet, you don't see it reflected in the mirror. But for the high quality mirror, we want to reflect the pickup object. So let's make sure we do pickup, and might as well do pickup no environment as well. So that is our layer set for the high quality. Let's go ahead and set up the low quality. So let's duplicate this by pressing Control D, and that's just going to duplicate the object. I pressed F2 to rename. Let's do LQ mirror. For the low quality mirror, we are going to turn off the default and the pickup, and then it will just be the players. And now it's bugging out because we've got two game objects directly on top of each other, and they're both trying to reflect stuff. Luckily, we don't need the mirrors to be on at the start, and we can turn off these mirrors by selecting both of them. So selecting one, shift, and left clicking on the other one. Going into the inspector, you can see there is this check mark right here. Let's click that. That disables it. It's still in your project. It's just disabled. People can't interact with it. People can't see it. It's not being rendered. When you toggle a mirror in VRChat, this is the value you're changing. So when you click that button, it turns on. When you click that button again, it turns off. Easy. So now we just need to create something that the player can interact with to turn on and off these objects. And we're going to do that using a UI menu and the VRChat toggle system. So that is, let's keep it under this game object, this mirror game object. Let's right click. Let's create UI and go down to canvas. And when you do that, you're going to create this big giant canvas thing, because I think by default it's set up to be like a 2D menu or something for games. We don't want it to be a 2D menu. We want it to be our canvas, our toggle buttons for our mirror. So I selected this game object. I pressed F2 to rename it. I'm going to rename it to mirror canvas. And then we need to change some of these settings so that it works better for VRChat. So if we go into the right in the inspector, instead of screen space, we need it to be world space. I'm going to change the position to be 0, 0, 0. And then I'm going to change the width and height to be 1000 by 1000. And then I'm going to change the scale to be 0.001 by 0.001 and by 0.001. So that's going to rescale this entire canvas to be something a bit more manageable. And it is over here. So I'm going to find where this is in my scenes. It's 0, 0 under this game object, which just happens to be over here. So pressing W, I can get these arrow keys and I can drag this somewhere to where I want it. So this is resized properly. Players can actually see this, but they can't interact with it yet because we need to add something very important, and it's a component called VRC UI shape. So add that. If without this, the player would not be able to interact with this UI menu. So we've got this menu. It's in here. Nothing's there yet. So let's add some stuff. So let's right click on the canvas, go to UI, and we are going to add toggle. And you should get something that looks like that. Let's change this up a bit so that's a bit prettier. We can see what this toggle is made out of. So if we select this toggle game object, going in the inspector, there's a whole bunch of stuff in here. In VRChat, by default, it's the navigation is set on automatic. We don't really need this. We can change this to none because the player is going to have their little laser that will be able to navigate with it. It's just a bit annoying when the navigation is on automatic. If we go, so in this game object, this is where we're going to have all the like, I guess like the coding and stuff to tell the game to turn something on and off. That's going to happen here. Everything underneath this is just cosmetic. So the background is this little checkered box. Let's change this to 0, 0, and maybe we'll change the height to like 100 Oh, that's width. So maybe we'll change the width to like 500 and 100. And maybe we can change this toggle to be centered. It does not feel centered. So I just changed the anchor presets to be the center, and then I made sure the X and Y position is 0. I'll probably do the same thing for this. The checkmark game object is the game object that is enabled to signify to the player that this toggle is on. What did I make that? That's 500 by 100. I'm gonna make the check mark the same, 500 by 100. Oops, where is it? So you can see it's being stretched to the size of this, but I'm gonna change it to something else. There's a whole bunch of stuff that comes in here. These are all like little icons. You'll have options in here that's default to VRChat or default to VRChat and Unity. But everything that I'm seeing right now, I think came in with the Pro TV. So we're gonna use some of the feature or some of the images that came in with that. Let's go to the background. This is all just cosmetics. We're gonna try and make this. Let's use the UI rounded. And that's going to round the corners a little bit. We can change that value a bit to make it maybe a bit prettier. And then if we go to check mark, I'm going to use the UI rounded outline fill. And then I'm going to change this to maybe be black. And then I'm going to change this value. And let's just change the color and alpha to be a bit nicer. Maybe we'll do something like that. And actually do white instead of black. This is kind of how I do most of my buttons. The label game object is your text mesh pro object, which just determines the text. We're going to change this to HQ mirror, and let's increase the size. Maybe let's reposition that. We're going to just play with this a bit too. I'm going to try to center this, and to begin with, I'm going to first center my text, and then I'm just going to play with these settings to get this in the center. Let's look at the fonts we have. I like Roboto. Change the font size. I'm changing this to be center instead of the settings it was before. It makes it a bit easier to recenter this. And we'll change the width to match the width of the button that I made. This is just UI cosmetics. We haven't even messed with actually turning the items off and on. But this will be our HQ mirror button. Instead of black, I'm gonna have that white. That's our first toggle. We're gonna press F2. I'm selecting the toggle game object, pressing F2, and rename this to HQ toggle. And then I'm gonna press Control D, and I'm gonna make this LQ toggle. And then maybe drag this down, hit this drop down. Let's go to label. Let's change this from HQ to LQ. Perfect. Now we can work on the toggle features. So let's go up to the main canvas game object. And we need to add something that's pretty important to make this toggle work. So when a player presses this HQ mirror button, I want it to turn off the LQ mirror button. That way, if they turn one on and then select another one, it toggles the other one off. To do that, we need to create a toggle group. So we're going to add a component to the canvas called toggle group. And we're going to hit this button called allow switch off. So check that on. And then if you go to the HQ toggle button, in the inspector for each toggle under the toggle component, you can go down to group, and it's gonna be looking for a group, and right now there's none that are assigned, but we just made one and it's in the canvas. So if we drag or select the canvas and drag it over into that group, you should be able to add it right there. Do that for LQ as well. So now both these toggles are assigned to this toggle group. If you hit one on, it turns one off. So now you only see one of them on at a time. If I select the HQ toggle and I go to this is on checkbox and I click it, it's going to turn off the LQ. And if I do the same thing over here, it's going to turn off the HQ. So let's start with the HQ on, or I can turn them both off, which is probably what we're going to start with. Now we need to make these toggles actually work. To do that, let's select the toggle. We're going to go and we're going to look at this on value change stuff. This is where we're going to make the toggle actually do what we want the toggle to do. So let's go over here. Let's hit this plus button, and this is the HQ toggle. So let's grab the HQ mirror game object. Let's drag it in here. And then we're going to hit this drop down. We're going to go to game object, and we want this toggle to set this active. We want this game object to set it active. So press set active. And now when you click this HQ button, it's going to be toggling this game object on and off. So let's do the same thing for the low quality. We're going to select the low quality toggle button, and then we're going to grab the low quality mirror game object. Oop, well, actually, before we do that, we need to press this plus button. Then we can grab that game object, drag it over, hit this drop down, go to game object, and press set active. And now this canvas should work. So let's place this. I'm going to select the canvas. Pressing W, I can get these arrows, and I can drag this over here. I'm going to just try to place this to the best of my ability. Pressing E for the rotate tool, holding control, I can lock it and rotate it 90 degrees. Let's place it like right there. That's probably good, probably. Play the scene and let's see if this works. So let's go over here, let's test this. We click that and the mirror turns on, but the low quality mirror turns on. No, it's turning on the right. I'm looking at the hierarchy here. It is turning on the right game objects. It just looks a bit weird. Let's see what's going on. And it's causing an error. I'm getting some error, so sometimes things break. Let's try to figure out what's going on. Error while saving prefab. So this has nothing to do with the mirror. Let's select this door. They're saying there's a missing script on here, so let's press this button. We can go into the prefab and kind of see what's going on. I probably just missed something when adding this, and it looks like I did. We can remove that, and we should be able to save, and that should fix that. And now we are going to go back to the mirrors. We're running into an issue where we play the scene and the reflect layers change from what we had selected to nothing. I've run into this error before, and I have not figured out why this is happening exactly. Maybe it has something to do with the prefab save. I'm not sure. Last time I ran into this issue, and stuff like this happens sometimes, but last time I ran into this issue, I restarted Unity, and I think that fixed it. So I'm gonna start there. We'll see if that fixes it. Back into Unity, just reopen. Let's change our reflect layers to what we want. So that's going to be mirror, reflect, pickup, no environment, pickup, player, local, player, and default. So that's the high quality one. Let's select the low quality one. And we want mirror, reflect, player, local, player, and I think that's it. So let's press play and let's see what happens. So in client sim, let's see if I press this and it's working. So restarted Unity works. So sometimes you run into issues, sometimes it just wants to be stupid for a little bit. If you're having issues, restarting Unity is a pretty safe bet. Re-importing the SDK or updating your SDK is a safe bet. But with that working properly, that is the mirror, and that's mirrors. It's in. I could call this world done, but there are some things that we didn't talk about. There's a lot of stuff we didn't talk about. We didn't create any particles, which we're not going to, but if you wanted to, you could, hypothetically, you could right-click in the hierarchy, go down to effects, and hit particle system, and then go into the inspector and play with all these values and try to make something cool. If that's what you wanted. I don't want to do that. That sounds like a lot of work. One thing I do want to talk about, though, is audio. When you're making a world, you might want to bring in an audio file, and we're going to do that exact thing right now. We're going to go into our folder. We're going to right-click, press Create. Let's create a folder. Let's do SFX for sound effects, and let's drag something in. So I have this audio file from an older project, and I pretty much bring this file into every project. It's an audio, it's a .wav file that's meant to loop. It's called room tone, and this is just going to add a hum to the room, like an air conditioning unit or something, just something to play in the background. There's a couple ways I can add this to the scene. I can right click in the hierarchy. I can go to audio source, and then I can drag this onto the audio clip. Alternatively, I could just drag this into the hierarchy. Both do the same thing. In the inspector, this is the default settings. I want it to be 2D audio because it's just going to be playing all the time in the background. We're going to have it play on the wake. I want it to loop. This setting is fine, but you can change the minimum distance and the max distance. We don't need it for this, but typically when you have a 3D audio source, you're going to want to add something that's called VRC spatial audio source. And then you'll probably want to click this to use the settings up here. This will make your audio a bit better in VRChat. But this is a 2D audio source, not a 3D audio source, so I don't need that. So I'm going to remove this component, and then I'm going to turn off the things that it turned on. I'm going to change the volume to 0.2. Let's play the scene. Let's see if this audio source works. It's also important to know that because I don't have the spatial audio source component on here, I may get an error in the console about not having it, or it might yell at me somewhere in here, but I'm just gonna ignore it because I don't need it for a 2D audio source, and that's fine. And if you can't hear it because I don't have my computer audio going through OBS, but you can take my word for it that I hear the room tone audio source. It is working. You can trust me. Let's leave out of client sim. The last thing we're going to do before we upload it to VRChat for PC and Quest is we are going to add a Skybox. There's no Skybox. Usually this is like one of the first things I do, but for some reason there's no windows in here, so you don't see it, and I don't, like, my lighting settings aren't taking the Skybox into account, like under environment, so there really is no reason to change this, but if you wanted to, this is how you would do it. Let's go into our folders. We're going to go into textures. We're going to right click. I'm going to create a new folder. Let's call it Skybox. And you can find Skybox textures. I have some textures I can pull from past projects. Here it is. So I'm just going to grab that file, drag it in like we've done with everything else. And now this is a, it's like a 360 image, I guess. I'm going to right click, create a material, because this is just a material. We're going to take this and let's make sure we're in the inspector, not in the light settings. Let's take our Skybox texture. Let's drag it here. We're going to change the shader to something that works with the Skybox. So we're going to go down to Skybox. Then we're going to do a panoramic, and that should work now at the sky. Now this is a bit blurry. I can take this and I can increase the size if I wanted to, and that makes everything a bit sharper, because a panoramic like 360 image is a pretty large file to work with, especially like in Unity. So typically you'd want it to be pretty high res, but nobody will ever see this, so it doesn't need to be high res. So I'm going to select it, go back into the inspector, let's change it back to 2K, and that way we're only taking up 1.3 megabytes of space instead of 5, as if the player's never going to see it, there's no real point. With that added, now this world is done. I'm calling it here. This is the completed world. Now I assume you may possibly want to visit it in VRChat, so let's upload it to VRChat. But before I do that, I'm noticing I'm having some weird issues. I don't know if you've noticed this, because I only just noticed it. If we play this scene and we test it, this texture is like flashing, this carpet texture, and I think I know why. Sometimes things happen when you're making worlds and you have to check things, and things break and things look weird, so you have to fix it, and it's all a process. I think because of how detailed this normal map is, I think it's really struggling with it. So I wonder if I compress it. I wonder if that will work. So I just compressed it. We're going to play the scene in client sim and see if it flashes some more. Oh, that does seem to be better. I think I actually did something there. Oh, nope, it's flashing. What if I just remove it? My next solution is just to remove it and see what's going on. It's still flashing. Maybe it's having issues with the high contrast values. So what if instead of, so the height map is not as contrasty as the carpet. So I wonder, maybe if I use that, changes the texture quite a bit. Maybe I put this on the height map as well. It changes the texture a little bit, but I think if it gets rid of that flashiness, it might be worth it. It totally does get rid of it. So yeah, the main issue there, so you just saw me live fix, or I don't know what I'm trying to say. Fix this issue. The issue was the high contrast on the texture. I think we can play around with this. I just said this world is done, but we can maybe play around with this a little bit. I kind of think I'd like it if it was a bit darker. So I selected the carpet material and I went into the inspector. I'm just playing with the color here because I liked all the dark values on here. So maybe if I just make it a bit darker, that'll feel nicer to me, and maybe we can change the color of the drywall so it's not so plain and white. Maybe it can be beige. I often use red, like a dark red. You can really do whatever you want. Maybe I'll keep it simple, just do like a light beige. Okay, now I think it's done. To upload a world to VRChat, first you need to make sure you got this VRCWorld game object, and we do have it, so that's basically all you need. We're going to go up to the VRChat SDK window or drop down here. We're going to press show control panel, and in here is where you're going to do everything. To begin, log into your account, and once you're logged in, go to Builder, and then in here we're going to create a name for our world. We're going to call this Tutorial Entertainment Room. And then you can put the description as whatever you want. Max capacity is how many people can fit into the world. I think the max is 80. The recommended capacity is what you recommend. So let's say for this one, maybe I recommend 12. Here's your content warnings, world debugging. If you want to get access to the debugging window in game, you can select that. Creating a thumbnail. We can take a picture directly in VRChat, so we can press, instead of selecting a new thumbnail where you can like select a file, we can press capture from scene, and then we can press, let's use post-processing, and we'll kind of center this however we want, press capture. Here's some warnings from VRChat about your world. If you're like me, you'll ignore all of that. Coming all the way down here, we can press the information provided above is accurate and I have the rights to upload this content to VRChat. I'm going to check mark that. And then you can right click or left click on this and press build and upload. So assuming you've got a VRCWorld game object in there and you don't have any very like serious errors or any compiler errors, you should be able to upload this no problem. If your world doesn't have any issues and you upload and everything works and is fine, you don't get any errors, you should see this uploaded or upload succeeded in green right here. So we can dismiss that. Once you upload your project once, only after you upload it once, you can then publish it to community labs if you want. I'm going to keep this private, but this only shows up after you've uploaded it once. If we go to VRCWorld and go to the pipeline manager and the inspector, you can now see that you have what I was calling like a serial number. You have a blueprint ID now for this world. So if you wanted to update this world, you need to make sure that it's using the same blueprint ID. If you go to content manager, in Content Manager, it will show you all the worlds and all the avatars that you have. You can copy. So like if you created a new project and you wanted to overwrite this world, you could copy this blueprint ID. So like if I wanted to upload this instead of like the black hat, I would just detach the blueprint ID and copy the black hat ID and put it there. So it kind of gives you the idea on how to do that. And so now we can go into VRChat and test this. So I guess let's do that. We're going to open up Steam and open up VRChat. And here we are in the world in VRChat. I turned on my audio output capture, so you should be able to hear everything. This looks a bit silly. I think the reason that looks that way is one of the fans is set to get baked, even though this is a moving object. It's not static, but you can still set non-static objects to bake if you want to. And I think one of the fan fins thing, I think one of them baked a bit dark, so it looks a bit silly. But other than that, I don't really notice anything. Let's check to make sure this works. That's on. Low quality is on. It's a mirror. It's got a collider on it, so I don't really like that, so maybe we'll turn that off. We can come over here to the video player. We can test it. So if you wanted to, I'm not going to test it because I don't have a video already. I can pick up the objects we set up as pickup. So everything's working. I can hear the audio that we set up. The buttons work. Everything is exactly as it should be. Maybe we'll bake again. We'll try to fix that. Let's go back to Unity. We can fix some of this stuff. So one of the things that I noticed is the mirrors have a box collider. I'm just going to uncheck this. So unchecking this is kind of the same as unchecking this, but for components. I don't really want the player to interact with this component. I'm going to leave it on. I'm just going to uncheck it. The other thing I noticed was this. Let's turn off the icon so I can actually see this thing. Yeah, this baked a bit weird. And if I go over into the inspector, the reason why, even though it's a non-static object, the reason why it baked is because I've got contribute GI. We're going to check that off, and then maybe we'll bake again. So going to the lighting settings, pressing generate lighting, just to see if we'll get something a bit better. So now it looks a bit different because light is not baking onto this part of this object anymore. It should just be using the light probes that we had put into the scene. So does this look better? That's the real question. We're going to play it. We're going to walk in and see if it looks a bit better. And I think it does. I think it does look better. So with that, let's upload again. We're going to go to the VRChat SDK, show control panel, come down here. We're not going to change any of these settings. It should be using all the same information. It's got the same blueprint ID as, like, we didn't change anything. So let's check this. The information provided above is accurate, yada, yada, yada. Build and upload. And after we upload this, we could go in and test it again, but I'm pretty confident in what we did. So instead of going in and testing, we'll just go straight to uploading for Quest. We've got the upload succeeded here, so we can go ahead and move forward. To upload to Quest, you need to change Unity to be the Android version of itself. If you go up here in the top left, you'll see some information about this project that you have open. And at the end, you'll see Windows, Mac, and Linux. So this is telling you you're making a PC game, basically. We need to change this so it says that we're building an Android game because Quest uses Android. To do that, you need to go to File, Build Setting. You're going to get this window. Go all the way down to Android. By default, you don't have this installed. And when you installed Unity, unless you clicked Android, you probably didn't install Android. To upload a Quest, you need this version. So if you don't have this available, if you select it, like if I select iOS, it'll say no iOS model. So it'll probably say like no Android module loaded, install with Unity Hub. So if that's the case, click install and install the Android version of Unity. Follow the steps and then come back here. Come back to this point after you've done that. I have it installed. So all I have to do is go to the right here, press switch platform, and let that load. Now, the first time you do this in Unity in this project or in whatever project you're doing, it's going to take a while to switch everything over. But after you do it the first time, it'll cache a lot of that information, so it won't take nearly as long. The first time you do it, it'll take a while. So just let it run, and it will switch in a moment, and we'll come back when it's done loading. It is done loading now, and immediately you'll notice that it looks kind of like shit, to be honest. But that's okay, because I know why it looks like shit, and that means we can fix it. The reason why it looks this way is because of the compression settings for the light map. So the light maps, if you remember, are kind of like this texture that gets laid. It's like an emissive texture that gets laid over the entire world. And if the compression settings for that are off and it looks bad, the whole thing's going to look bad. And that's kind of what's happening here. So we need to go into our folders, go find your light maps, which is, for us, if you follow it the way that I did it, is in the scenes folder. And so here it is for us. We need to change the compression settings so that it works a bit better for something like Android. So let's select both of them by holding Shift. We can go into the inspector. We're going to go over to the Android settings. So we're going to click this button, override for Android. This can be 4K. That should be fine. We're going to go down to Format. And we're going to change it to something like RGBA compressed ASTC 4x4 block. So let's change it to that and press apply. And let's see. And it kind of fixed all the issues that we were having. Things compile a bit differently for Android, so things might look a bit weird. I don't know if I would. I'm looking at the height map on the carpet. I wonder if I should take that off. But it should be fine. We could play this just like we did in the PC version. You also notice up here in the top left, it says Android instead of like Windows, Linux, and whatever else it said. But just like in the Windows version, we can press play and it'll use client sim for VRChat, and we could play around and walk around and make sure that everything's still working properly, which it should be. I don't know any reason why it wouldn't, but if anything specific looks kind of weird. Oh, it's doing that thing again. That same error I had before. I'm telling you, it happens. Why does that happen? It changed our reflection layers for the mirrors, so this is clearly a bug that I should probably tell somebody about, or look on the canny or something to see if anyone's talking about it. Another thing that's a bit interesting is we now have some light coming up because we had added this material after we had baked the first time. We've got some light coming off of the TV here, so that's probably in an uploaded version. But because I'm experiencing this bug again with the reflect layers with the mirrors, I'm going to restart Unity one more time. So let me go ahead and do that. While I'm restarting Unity, maybe I can rejoin this world and check out the new upload that we did. And this is with the new bake. We've got the fan looking a little bit better. And now we've got this like light coming off of. It's purple and not a lot of stuff that I usually use the video player for as purple light. I feel like that's a bit of a unique color. So it might be a bit weird having that light there, but should be fine. It showed up because that material has an emissive. When you bake lights, Unity will bake emissive maps. So that's why it's there now. It looks good. Everything still loads the same. Oh no, we have that error again in here. We'll have to re-upload it to PC. So I'm gonna select both the mirrors. Back in Unity, we are gonna, actually I'm just gonna do HQ. We need mirror reflect, pickup no environment, pickup, player local, player, and then default. For the LQ mirror, the low quality, we need mirror reflect, player local. Play this scene in the client sim and let's double check to make sure that's working properly. And it is working. That is good news. This looks ready. I had mentioned earlier that post-processing does not work on Android, and if we toggle this on and off, we can see that it's doing something in Unity, but when you upload this to VRChat, it's not going to do anything in VRChat, so we can just toggle it off. Let's go ahead and upload this. VRChat SDK, show control panel, builder. This information provided above is correct. We're going to upload it to the same blueprint ID. We won't see the changes on PC, but if you went into the world and on Quest, you would see these changes. So this won't have any effect on the PC build. So press build and upload, and then it will upload to Quest, and then we'll have to switch back to Windows to upload on Windows again. I know we just uploaded this, but and I didn't really talk about the errors that we were seeing here, but maybe I should go over this a little bit. So when you're doing stuff and you're adding stuff to your world, VRChat's going to give you some like warnings about, is this world compatible for Quest? Is it going to work when you upload it? And it might give you some of the issues that you could face. So let's see what's going on here. Default texture format on Android should be set to newer AST. So this is recommending that you compress your textures in a certain way for Quest. And it's got an option here that we can auto fix that. Let me hold up. And it's got an option here that will auto fix, basically go through all of our textures, go into the Android version, override for Android, and then select the proper compress options. So we can go ahead and press that, but it said it could take a while depending on how many textures you have, which I don't have a lot, so it probably won't take that long. Let's see what else is here. Found 2D audio source. So this is what I was saying with the room tone. This is a 2D audio source. It's not a 3D audio source. We don't need the VRC spatial audio source Gameobject. If we press select, it's going to bring me to what I had select, or it's going to bring me to the audio source, which I already had selected. But that's what that's referring to. Because so the next one is referencing Pro TV. Because Pro TV is a prefab that I imported, and it's saying it's using an unsupported shader, I just kind of ignore these. I use standard shader. For Quest, it might be better to use something like, if you go to, instead of standard, you can go to VRChat, mobile, standard light. This is like VRChat's version of standard, and you can do that for each one of them, but I don't want to change it because it will change my shader on PC, and standard isn't really that bad of a shader, so I'm going to go ahead and ignore this. Same thing with this, just another shader error. Now there are some shaders that are made for PC and VRChat that will be incredibly intensive for Android. So don't, just because I'm ignoring these, don't think you can just ignore. Don't think you're just not going to have any issues if you're using a whole bunch of different shaders from a whole bunch of different people, if you don't understand how intensive they are and how they work on Quest, you may run into issues. You may go into your world and be like, why is this really laggy on Quest? You do have to be careful. You can't just throw whatever shader you want on here. Some stuff just won't work also. But I know Unity standard will be fine, especially with this amount. It's not going to be a big deal. Found one or more UI graphics using Unity's built-in UI shader. This is also a shader for UI menu, so it's referencing these. Maybe if I press autofix, I didn't notice a difference, but apparently we fixed it. Let's go ahead and press autofix for this. It will compress the textures, and it took 0 time. Now we could upload this again, but I don't really want to be honest. But you could upload it again. Let's go ahead and go to my world. And if we can see now that it is, because we had just uploaded it to Quest, we can see that it is now a working world on PC and on Android. But we can go in there, and here we are inside the world. Like I just said, we can't see the changes from Android that we uploaded, but we do have this wonderful HQ mirror reflect layer issue, so we need to fix that. So let's go back to Unity. I'm not going to re-upload this for Android. It is okay, but you can, especially if you make significant changes. Let's go to build settings. We're going to go back to Windows, Mac, and Linux. We're going to press switch platform. This shouldn't take as long as it did the first time. We're back in the PC version. It's already done loading. We're here to check the mirrors. And right now they are reflecting, the HQ mirror is set up to reflect, it looks proper. The LQ, because we had fixed it on the Quest version, so it should be fine. I'm going to play this scene to make sure nothing breaks when we play this scene, because when you're uploading, you're essentially just playing the scene, or you're like compiling everything. So when we compile everything, let's make sure that nothing breaks. And I've got the LQ mirror and the HQ mirror selected. It looks like it still has the proper layer selected, so nothing broke. We can go ahead and upload this to PC. Going to the VRChat SDK, going to show control panel, hitting this checkbox and pressing build and upload. And let's see, in a moment we'll be able to join this world on PC and see if it fixed the issue. This is finished uploading, so let's go to VRChat. In the world now, let's go ahead and check what we were trying to fix, and the mirror is working again. Cool. That is a annoying bug, but it is what it is. But that's it. This world is uploaded, and it's working, and it's perfect. And I know that I didn't record myself going into the Quest version, and as of recording this right now, I haven't tested it. I'm sure you can take my word for it. It's probably fine. So yeah, that's how you make a world from scratch. Hopefully you learned something. If you're having trouble or you need help, you can, DM me or post a comment to this video. I'll do my best to help without having to get in a call with you, because I don't like getting in calls with people. But that's all I got. Okay, bye.